I want to do two things today. I want to speak to our head and I want to speak to our heart. So this morning, I want to start out by speaking to our head, the environment we're in and the ministry we're trying to do. And then in the second session, I want to talk to our hearts, the way we do ministry. Are we doing it in a healthy way that's going to bring honor not only to Jesus Christ, but going to bring honor to our family? And are we going to have a byline in Christianity today that says, wow, this person was really great? Or are we going to have sons and daughters and a spouse who's going to say, this person was really good? And given the option of those two, I think I know what we all say we'd want, but we don't always walk down that path. I want to title this session here, Blind Spots and Real Estate Agents, okay? Blind Spots and Real Estate Agents. And I want to start out by talking about a real estate agent's business card. One of my sons has a side hustle of doing real estate, does pretty well on the side with that. But how many of you have seen a real estate agent card? Help me out. Okay, what do they all have on them? What? They have their picture on the front, right? Why? Like, I know who you are, you're right in front of me. And second of all, think about it. Does it help them to have that picture on that card? No. They don't gain anything. They only lose because that picture's on the card. You look at somebody and you go, you know, the gal who has that glamour shot, well, that's going to gain somebody, and other people are going to go, bimbo, she doesn't know anything about real estate. What's up with this, okay? My son, very young, you look at him and you go, well, he has no experience. Why would I let him sell my piece of property? You get somebody of my age and you go, oh, they know yesterday. They don't know all the ins and outs of this. Somebody of color, somebody of, whatever it is you look at, you're going to gain a few, but you're going to lose because you have that. And yet every card has it for one simple reason, because everybody else in the real estate business has it there. Now, you don't think those of us in ministry would have any of that tendency, would you? But we obviously do, don't we? And so what I want to talk about are some of those blind spots where we approach the way that we do ministry, where we give the dictionary definition to words that are not so much accurate or moving the ball down the field or helping with the Great Commission as much as they are just simply parroting what everybody else is doing. So I want to talk a little bit about this thing called discipleship. Would you agree with me? We all want to be making disciples, right? I mean, yeah, hey, we're into discipleship. But I want to point out some blind spots that I think are actually keeping us from making disciples. Great Commission. Do we all want to fulfill the Great Commission? Well, ironically, there's some things that we are doing in our churches just because everybody else is doing it that are not helping us with the Great Commission. They're actually hurting us with the Great Commission. And then I want to talk about some cultural things that have happened because we're not in Kansas anymore. What I find what's interesting is when it comes to analyzing culture, most of the books or talks that I come across on it are all about the next generation and figuring out what it's going to be like and what it's going to do, seeing short-term a few changes that have happened and saying, wow, where this is going to go. But if you know anything about culture, if you've lived long enough, you realize life doesn't go in a straight line. Okay, there are events that happen, and if you predict a generation, let's just take millennials, okay? Do they ever get the bad side, right? People, they say, okay, this is what a millennial is like, and therefore this is what the church is going to be like. Okay, help me. Which millennial are you talking about? You're talking about an urban millennial, you're talking about a rural millennial, you're talking about the millennial that's trying to get into a great college, you're talking about the millennial that wants to be in a great band someday. I can go on and on and on, and it's like, they're not all that similar. And the next thing, we take where they are today and we extrapolate, that's where they're going to be 25 years from now. Well, if that was true, I'd still be living in a VW van with a ponytail and tie-dyed pants. Okay? Life changes, but there are certain unchangeable present things. When we move into the cultural thing, I'm going to take a lesson from a guy named Peter Drucker. How many of you know the name Peter Drucker? Okay. Peter Drucker was this management guru, kind of the first one there. And one of the things he was famous for is he predicted the failure of the European social safety net and immigration problems in Europe 25 years before they happened. How did he do that? He did not see the future. No one can see the future. It's constantly changing. He saw the unchangeable present. And what was the key unchangeable present? 0 birth rates. When you have a 0 birth rate in a country, 25 years from now, you're not going to have enough workers at the bottom of the food chain to allow the pensions to be funded. And you are going to have to bring in people, so you're going to have a major immigration rush to be able to do the work that 20 to 30-year-olds, 20 to 25-year-olds do. And there are some unchangeable futures that we're going to look at. So there you kind of have a sense of where we're going to head. But let's talk first of all about this idea of discipleship and leadership. And I'm going to use this thing here for a second. Because I want to challenge us all to rethink this concept of discipleship. Because for a lot of us, what we have done is we have confused discipleship and leadership and made them into the same thing. And I like to look at it this way. I'm a preacher and a teacher, not an artist, so do you promise to give me grace? Okay. And who knows? This is like 3 hours earlier. I probably can't spell in the morning either, but here we go. So what we've got is discipleship and leadership are the 2 rails that the local church and the church universal run on. We, as a local church, have to have it. As a church universal, have to have it. If we don't have discipleship, we have no salt and light. We have not fulfilled the Great Commission. If we don't have leadership, we have no future. So they are the 2 rails: discipleship and leadership. But what has happened is that most of us are leaders in this room, and our path of discipleship has turned us into a leader. And we make the assumption that everybody's path of discipleship ought to turn them into a leader. Because we do this thing I like to call gift projection. And gift projection is when the ear looks at the eye and says, "What's wrong with you? You can't hear anything." And we tend to do that same thing. And so what has happened is we've taken these 2 and we've turned them into a monorail. And when discipleship and leadership become one and the same, what happens is the train tips over. Because it was never designed to be a monorail. And when it tips over on one side, what you get is a bunch of arrogant leaders who are always down on the people who aren't leaders. You've been in those kind of conversations. They're the ones we're prone to be in. The other side, when it tips over on the other side, you get despairing Christians who are fulfilling their giftedness and calling of God but feel like a piece of trash. How many of you went to Bible school or seminary? Help me out. Raise your hand. Okay. Keep them up for just a second so I can kind of see who you are. Did you have in your classes people that you look at them and go, "Why are they here? They can't lead their way out of a paper bag. And they're spending, years at Bible school or years at seminary." Why were they there? Because of this myth. They thought the greatest way of serving God was to be in vocational ministry. To mix metaphors instead of rails like a ladder, it's the idea that the higher you climb on the discipleship ladder, when you get to the very top, you move into ministry. When you get to the very, very top, you're in vocational ministry. I remember a guy I was having lunch with. I'll call him Bob because his name was Bob. And so Bob and I are having lunch. Now, here's what you need to know about Bob. Bob was an incredibly, incredibly generous man, and he knew how to make money. I mean, I swear sometimes, like, are you printing it? That kind of person, whatever they invested in, whatever they wanted to do, it just turned to gold. And so what he would do is he would make all kinds of money, and then he's using it to support the kingdom of God. Now, there's a spiritual gift in the Bible called giving. But because of this tendency to take these two things and turn them into one, he felt like a piece of trash. And in his late 50s, he wants to have lunch with me, and he says, I'm thinking of going into the ministry. I go, Bob, what do you mean? Well, I'm thinking of selling all my stuff, and I'm going to go, there's this other country he wants to go to, and I'm going to go there, and I'm going to work there. And I'm sitting there going, right now you are funding all kinds of ministries, and now you're going to have people fund you? On top of that, I didn't say this out loud, but like, you're one of the most boring people I've ever been around. You can't communicate. If you try to communicate in another language, oh my God, have mercy. And if you're being translated, they're just going to say what they want, not what you said. And like a lot of people who are really good with finances and money and those kind of entrepreneurial things, he was like the least team player dude you've ever met in your life. He's fulfilling the call, he's fulfilling his giftedness, and he feels like a piece of trash because we made him feel like a piece of trash. We turned these two things into a monorail, and when the train tipped over his side, he feels like a loser. When it trips over our side, we are filled with arrogance, which, number one thing God hates. That's not a good place to be. So what's the difference between them? Let me show you. Discipleship is for everyone. It's mandatory. You don't get to be a follower of Jesus to say, but I don't want this discipleship thing. There's no way. The Greek word mathetes means follower, okay? If it's everyone, then it means the good, bad, and the ugly. One of the things some of us have fallen in the trap of doing is raising our definition of discipleship higher than the biblical definition, right? And so we will tell people you're not a disciple. In fact, if some of you are like the discipleship pastor in some of our churches, I know what your job description is basically. Find Christians and make them better Christians. Well, that's kind of weird. Because I guarantee you, when the disciples heard the Great Commission, go into all the world and make what? It wasn't find Christians and make them better Christians. It was find people who don't know Jesus, help them know Jesus, and don't quit until you've baptized them and taught them to obey everything that Jesus taught. So we want mature ones, but our definition of disciple, sadly, when we combine these two things, this is one of the things that shows how we've done it, is we have Christians and disciples like they're two different things. Or we go the other way. I've been at conferences speaking with some friends of mine, and you listen to them, and they pretty much say, if you're not following Jesus like a special ops officer, you're not really a disciple. In fact, you might not even be a Christian. I wrote a book called Accidental Pharisees, and in that book, one of my favorite sections is a story of a guy named Joseph of Arimathea. You guys familiar with him? Now, for most of us, because we're like fish in water, you ask the fish how's the water, it goes what water, because that's all it knows. We tend to read the Bible story through our modern day experiences, forgetting there were house churches, there was no mobility, etc. And we do that when it comes to death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. I have always treated Joseph of Arimathea as pretty much, he's a conjunction. He connects the death and the resurrection. He had to be buried somewhere. And how cool is it that it fulfills an Old Testament prophecy in the tomb of a rich man? But that's because I think everybody gets buried. The truth of the matter is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell the story of Joseph of Arimathea, which I had never preached on, because to them he was an incredible hero, because they understood how life really worked then. When you were a crucified criminal, something crucified, a Roman citizen couldn't even have happened, what happens to your body after it's taken down? It's thrown on the garbage heap. That sucker be gone in 12, 24, 48 hours. No Joseph, no resurrection. So all the accounts make a big deal. These guys that we say, oh, they were the real disciples. They left everything behind. They were totally sold out. We ought to be like them. Where were they? Totally clocked out, right? Off the job. And they all say there were these women here, and there was a guy named Joseph. One other account lets us know Nicodemus was there. All four accounts. Well, who was Joseph of Arimathea? Joseph of Arimathea was a prominent member of the Sanhedrin, the group that called Jesus a blasphemer and turned him over to be killed. Not just a member, a prominent member. He was in the room. He must have laid low, hid in the weeds. How could he do that? Here's the other weird thing. Did you know the Bible twice calls him a disciple before he stepped forward to take the body of Jesus, not afterward? Now, I don't know about your definition of a disciple, but John comes and tells us why he didn't speak up. John tells us he was a secret disciple because he feared his fellow Jews. Here's my question for you. If you have someone who claims to be a Jesus follower, they're afraid to speak up because of what they lose, would you tell them you're not even a Christian? Would you tell them they're a piece of trash, or would you say you're a disciple? Now, granted, a sucky disciple. Okay. Absolutely sucky disciple. But what I also like to call a not yet ready disciple. And when we in our arrogance write off those who are not yet ready, when the Bible twice calls them a disciple, and when they step forward to be the star of the show, when all the people we're impressed with disappear and aren't playing their part, something's wrong with the way we're approaching ministry. Okay? What we're doing is we're turning into a group of accidental Pharisees. You realize the Pharisees did not want to be the enemies of God. They wanted to be the defenders of God. They were absolutely serious. They were totally biblical. I mean, no one knew the Bible more. No one was more careful to follow it. And yet they woke up one day when God actually showed up as his enemies. And we love to rip on them, and we never look in the mirror and realize that's exactly who we are. We become that almost overnight. And one of the reasons is, and that's why I'm talking about this, is our confusion here, because we look in the mirror and we say, if they haven't become like me, they're not following Jesus. So this is for everyone. Leadership is for some. Jesus said, if anyone wants to sit at my right or left hand, this is what they must do. He did not say everyone who loves me is obviously going to sit at my right or left hand. Now, I miss this so badly because, again, gift projection, like you do, I do, we all do it. It takes a lot of work to get out of gift projection. And when I became a follower of Jesus, I immediately fell in love with the Word and started teaching and could remember things I read, thinking it was because I was so committed to God, not realizing, no, if he's going to gift you as a teacher, he'll probably gift you with that ability to close your eyes and see where in a page that verse was. He'll gift you with the ability to see connections. See, I thought that was me because I'm pursuing God so much. And it's like, no. Just like my wife has a gift that helps in mercy, and she sees needs that I don't see. Okay? That's like when God gives you a gift, he's going to give you a wiring. And so what happens is Jesus says, if anyone wants to. Paul, when he writes to Timothy, says, if anyone aspires to the office of an overseer, here's the qualifications. Not Timothy, you must raise up overseers. Not Timothy, everybody who loves Jesus is going to want to be. No, if they want to, tell them what it's about. Does this make sense to you, this difference? Okay, so here's what it's about then. The next step of obedience. Everybody has the next step of obedience. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea were two secret disciples. We know about Nicodemus because of John, that his first step was just to go meet with Jesus and ask questions and all of that. And then the next step for Joseph later on, when he hadn't taken many, was to step forward and boldly claim the body. The Apostle Paul is writing scripture, and in Philippians he says, I have not yet obtained it. It never ends. There's always a next step of obedience. Every message we preach, everything we do ought to be calling people to their next step of obedience if we're a discipleship-oriented church. If we're a discipleship-oriented church, doesn't mean we turn people into leaders. We turn them into followers and their next step. What is leadership? It's about the next step of sacrifice. Now, granted, the next step of obedience has sacrifices in it. okay? I get that. But leadership is all about sacrifice. Okay, you want to be a leader? You want to sit at my right or left hand? That is perfectly fine. Then you come and you become a servant. And you want to be absolutely at top, you become a slave. You want to really follow me to the top of leadership, you lay down your life for other people. That's leadership. Now, one of the things I know we do that hurts our ability to raise up disciples is we take people who want to help out at the church and we treat them like they want to be leaders in the church. And instead of saying thank you, we say more. There's people that's, again, just mixing metaphors, is we're supposed to row through the community for Jesus, just get from here to there. And so they step forward and say, I'll grab an oar, and they help us row through. And at the end of the day, we act like they want to be a pastor, and we're saying, well, why don't you do more? 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 I've been in plenty of leadership meetings where people complain because the people who are serving aren't committed enough. And what they're really doing is they're not sacrificing enough. So imagine, I was a PE teacher and the basketball coach at a small little one school, high school town. I want everybody to get some exercise and learn the basic rules of basketball. I want everybody to get that. But I don't want everybody to be on the basketball team. And if I act like everybody should be on the basketball team, I got a problem. You see, if I'm also the coach of the basketball team, I look at who's tall, who's athletic, and who knows how to play the game, and I go to them and say, hey, you want to be on the basketball team? We're starting one. And if they say, yes, I want to be on the team, I say, meet me at 5:30, we're going to run gassers. And I thin the herd of the wannabes to the really will be's by the sacrifice. Now imagine if I go to the whole PE class and say, tomorrow morning you're showing up at 5:30 to run gassers. I probably don't have my job very long, right? And here's the other thing. I'll never be able to have a good basketball team because I'm treating everybody like they're a basketball player. So I want to get real practical where this goes. Besides getting rid of the arrogance and the despair, here's another thing. You will not have a hard time finding leaders if you quit looking in the wrong places. If I'm looking for gold, and I'm going up and down the street just trying to find, I can't find any gold. It is so hard to find. It's like, no, you go to the places where the geography says there's probably gold here. Where the geology says, okay, there's precious metals in this place. And you look there, you're going to have a lot better odds of finding what you're looking for. One of the things I've found at North Coast churches over the years, yes, our vision has always outpaced our finances and resources. That's what vision is. Never changes. No matter how big the church gets, how big the budget gets. But here's what I found. We've always been able to get the leaders we need because we don't try to make everybody into a leader. And when we're trying to make everybody into a leader, we've only got so much focus, so much time, so much energy, and we exhaust ourselves. We get cynical, we get angry, we get frustrated at the sheep we're supposed to take care of. Here's the number one mark of a leader when you're looking for them. They ask to lead. Right? You say we need a group of people to help launch this campus. A leader steps forward with new ideas. A leader steps forward, well, can I do this? So we ask somebody to do it, they do that, and they do a little bit more. And if you will focus your time, instead of trying to make everybody a leader, but make leaders into leaders, you will find you will have the people you need. And you will be a lot less frustrated and a lot less annoyed at the flock God has given you. Because we're told to shepherd the flock, not rip on the flock that God has given us. Make sense? So I just want to challenge our definitions of discipleship because everybody has moved that way. It keeps moving away from the simple word mathetes to the word overseer. And we haven't even noticed it. And we've become angry, and we've got a lot of despairing people in our churches. By the way, here's a couple other, another thing it does. It undercuts one of the most core doctrines of the Bible. It's called the priesthood of believers. Because what happens is when we think the discipleship ladder at the top is leadership, at the very top is vocational ministry, not only do you get Bobs who try to be what God doesn't want them to be, but as we do that as well, what happens is we call up the people in our church, you know, small little church setting or something. You got somebody going away to Bible school and you call them up and pray for them. We ought to be calling up those who are going away to engineering school. Those who are going away to become a hairstylist. Those who are going away, right? We are all in ministry. And people in our pews and our churches and our chairs, they don't believe that. And we're the one who've given them the wrong message. They actually, and the truth of the matter is, the moment you become vocational, there are certain things you can do you couldn't do before, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just gone. Man, it was so much easier to share the gospel when I was a journeyman retail clerk at a grocery store than when they find out I'm a pastor, game over. Okay? Now, in the old days, people used to talk on an airplane. They fly very much now. No, they don't. They put on the headphones. It's over. Thank you, Jesus. I like that. But I used to feel this thing. I need to talk to people or whatever, okay? I'd have all kinds of, man, I would do everything I could to let them, you know, well, what do you do? I'm a speaker. I'm a consultant. I'm an author. I'm a husband. I'm a man. I'm anything before I'm a pastor. Because the moment I'm a pastor comes out, it is over. Right? Our people out there on the front lines aren't just surviving so they can come and help on Sunday. They are on special assignment from Jesus Christ and need to wake up as excited about going to work as hopefully you are excited about coming in on Sunday. And we can't just judge who's advancing the kingdom by who fills a slot at our church. We need to ask who's advancing the kingdom by who fills a slot through the week. We need to become what my friend Tom Nelson calls a church for Monday instead of just a church for Sunday. And this discipleship leadership confusion has destroyed our ability to see that. And because everybody else has seen discipleship as special ops, we keep raising the bar just as high. Let me give you a second thing where we tend to be blinded. And that is when it comes to the Great Commission and church governance. Now, let me ask a simple rhetorical question. Which is more important, the Great Commission or our method, a model of governance? Help me, talk to me. My church does. It's the Great Commission, right? But it's amazing to me how many of our churches hit a lid because we are more devoted to our church polity, our church governance, our church history, our church patterns, making sure the pastor isn't going to get away with too much or whatever it would be, than we are committed to the Great Commission. And part of it is, once again, because everybody else has a picture on the card, we have a picture on the card. One of the things that where we get sideways on this has to do with the way we read the book of Acts. The book of Acts is a description of the spread of the church, and we've turned it into a prescription of how to do ministry. And the moment the book of Acts becomes a prescription of how to do ministry, we're going to have a hard time because we're not doing ministry in the same environment, time, or place. We've all done this. I've done it. Did my little series on being the church in Acts chapter 2, right? How many of you preached that one or taught that in a Sunday school, right? Yeah, I mean, I've got the old notes. But here's my thing. Whenever somebody says to me, I want to be a New Testament church, right? Common thing. I go, have you read the New Testament? Because those dudes were jacked up, right? I want to be a church planter like the Apostle Paul. Really? Because he planted these messed up churches. That's why he had to write all those letters. For real. This one's going New Age, you know, this one's going all legalism. We won't even talk about the Corinthians. And Acts chapter 2. Oh, I want to be just like that church. Really? Okay. Have you noticed how we pick and choose? We want to be devoted to the Word. We want to be devoted to fellowship, breaking bread, which we then define our own different ways. The apostles' teaching, okay, that's pretty good. But none of my Republican friends like the idea of everybody sharing everything with everybody. And none of my Democratic friends like the idea of meeting every single day. And no one wants to go to the Temple Mount. Now, we all want to be held in awe and good honor and respect by everybody around us, but my charismatic friends say, yeah, but it's because there were signs and wonders. Oh. And on top of that, you realize they did not fulfill the command of God. He said, go into all the world, and they stayed in Jerusalem. He said, don't go until the Holy Spirit comes, but when he comes, I got a roadmap for you, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, outermost parts of the world. But they, like Harold Camping fans, decided, well, he's coming back real soon. We'll just stay here. Why would we leave? And I wonder if they're selling everything they had as part of the reason later on there was an offering taken for the poor saints in Jerusalem. And I wonder if it might not have been so much their heart to share as the fact that in that culture, zero mobility, people had come for Pentecost. All of this stuff happens. They think Jesus is returning. No one has Western Union. No one has a credit card. He's coming back real quick. A hospitality culture. Maybe that's why they sold what they had. And finally, in Acts chapter 8, God sends a persecution. Because that's the only way he could get them out of their holy huddle. And you want to be in Acts chapter 2, church. Maybe you are already. Oh, just curious. Be proud. How many of you are Gentiles here? Come on, be proud. You do realize they didn't want you. Huh. Now, how does this apply to church governance? Well, I think I have Acts chapter 6. Acts chapter 6 is one example, but it's a passage where deacons are brought in the church. If you remember that story, there was a battle between the Hellenistic and the Hebraic widows, and the apostles were handing out the widows' checks, going place to place to give them to everybody. And they got sidetracked. They were no longer able to focus on the word and prayer and the Great Commission. They were just settling disputes between these arguing people and handing out checks. And they said, this isn't right. We need to get another group of people. And they need to be godly. And we're going to call them table servers or deacons. And they're going to care for the people. So we read that passage and we read back into it and go, oh, do we have deacons? Are they doing exactly what they did in Acts 6? Are they picked the same? In other words, we try to treat that as a prescription and match it in our church. Well, here's the thing. The major lesson of Acts chapter 6 is not here's how to organize your church. The major lesson of Acts chapter 6 is you can organize any way you want to better fulfill the Great Commission. That's what Acts chapter 6 teaches. If we didn't jump to every definition because they got their picture on the card. Because think about it. First of all, I bet you nobody was happy with that change, especially the widows. You know, they're like, Peter's stories are amazing. Who's this Stephen dude? He's boring. They even said no one from the church visited me. And I'm sure there was some little lady there who said, I've memorized every word of Jesus in red. And he never said anything about deacons. This is unbiblical. And she'd be right. Jesus didn't authorize deacons. Jesus didn't authorize elders. Jesus didn't authorize church councils. The Holy Spirit guided and led each of those so they could fulfill what Jesus did authorize, a Great Commission. So here's my challenge to you. Are you so wedded to the theology of your church polity and governance that you think it's okay, it's killing your ability to lead lost people to Jesus Christ? And it happens over and over in all kinds of camps and all kinds of places. Our theology moves from teaching us about who God is and who we are and how life works, so much to how we ought to organize our church that we think it's really okay. In fact, I've actually had people tell me, well, we're just being faithful and it doesn't really matter. I go, that's weird. That's really weird. He didn't authorize any of those things that we worked so hard to duplicate. Now, I want to give you context. Our church is led by an elder board. I am a Bible guy. I got a Bible verse for everything, even if it's out of context. So I don't want some of you jumping to Mr. Practical or whatever. I'm asked to talk about leadership in this session, and I am. And I'm sharing with you the battles that we've had to face at North Coast since it was planted. And we found ourselves wedded more to polity than commission. And we found ourselves trying to create everybody into a leader instead of everybody into who God has called them to be. And we wanted everybody to grow overnight. We had no room for the not yet ready hanging in the weeds. While we applauded all those who appeared to be so good, but later on were going to run for their life. Okay. So basically, I'm just telling you the story of the journey that I had to work through as well. But I said I wanted to talk about discipleship and leadership, some blind spots we have there, like the picture on the business card, the Great Commission, and church governance, some blind spots I think we have. And this next little section is the cultural changes that I think a lot of us are missing. And I'm just going to quickly walk through some unchangeable presents like I talked about earlier. Things that I'm certain aren't going to change, and I think you will totally agree with me. And here's what I want to leave you with. I want you to ask, especially those of you that are here as a team, I would love you to ask today and the next few days this question. Are we doing our ministry in light of these unchangeable changes? Like Paul says, all things to all people that I might reach some. Or are we doing our ministry so we could reach people very well 30 years ago? So what are those unchangeable changes? The first one is this. I'm going to give you I've got a number I won't tell you because then you won't know what I leave out. How's that? But the first one that's an unchangeable present is this. We live in a highly segmented tribal culture. You are doing your ministry in a highly segmented tribal culture. Those of you that are note takers, write down other phrases. We all live in echo chambers today. Now, it's very interesting to me because people blame this tendency. Would you all agree we're kind of in an age of rage where no one talks to anybody anymore? They just argue with each other, okay? And no one listens. There's no news anymore. There's only opinion. It gets blamed on various leaders depending on where you are in the political spectrum. That's not what caused it. Here's what caused it. We've always been people of echo chambers. We just didn't used to live next door. When I was growing up, long ago, far away in another galaxy, we were tribal by geography. My dad was a teacher and then a principal. When summers, we'd travel around the country. And I was in the Northeast. I knew I wasn't in San Diego anymore and Southern California. When I was in the South, man, they thought differently than we thought here. When I was in the Midwest, they thought, you with me on this? And that's why back then, a pastor who succeeded in the Deep South would come to Washington or Southern California and would bomb. Or some guy would come from San Diego and he'd say, hey, here I am to save Atlanta. And Atlanta go, who the heck you are? Get out of here, dude. It just didn't work because they didn't know all the people in the South, all the people in the Northwest and the Southeast, wherever it is. We didn't know we were living in echo chambers. And then there was a thing called AM radio and television that came along. And they created a monolithic culture because there were only a few radio stations. And then when television came, 3 major networks. And when I was a real little kid in elementary school, we still were in the realm of 3 networks. And so I could go to school and everybody had seen the same show. So we went from tribal by geography to monolithic by media. And some of you are at an age where you still think we live there. And when we were monolithic by media, you would go and you would talk about the TV show Laugh-In or whatever it would be, and all your friends had seen it. Because there were only 3 stinking options. Okay? And so it created these shared experiences. That's why for a period of time, people could show video clips from television shows or whatever, and the whole congregation would get it. Not true anymore. Here's, and these numbers aren't exact. These are preacher numbers. I got them, if you want to catch me at the break. I'm not going to look them up here. But basically, I think it was when I Love Lucy was #1 show, 74% of Americans watched every episode. Nielsen ratings. Not watched every, but that's who were tuned in. By the time The Cosby Show was #1, it was 50%. By the time Seinfeld was #1, it was 34%. By the time NCSI was #1, it was 17%. And that made you #1. That means 83% of people never saw it. That's why if you show clips today, most of the congregations looking at you, what's that? Because even the #1 show, people don't watch. The thing that's talked about all the time, not many people watch. Why? Because we have options. AM radio, cable television became FM radio. 3 networks became FM radio and cable television. And then we now have podcasts. We now have, on my phone, I have over 8 days of music. I have my own library. I listen to what I want, when I want, wherever. I have 3 kids that by the grace of God did not rebel, so they grew up in the same home, had kind of the same walk with God, all went through the same youth group because I've been in the same church forever, and yet they have no idea of each other's music. It was not long ago, there was a thing called youth music. My oldest son is a brain on a stick, so it wouldn't surprise you, he likes alternative type music. My daughter is tell me what to do, what are the rules, jump through the hoops, cross country, high discipline runner. She likes country music. And my youngest son was literally the token white guard on his basketball team, and he likes spoken word and knows the difference between East Coast and West Coast. And they have no idea who the stars are in the other world. Is that the world you're living in? So here's what that means. Let me get practical with that. You no longer can reach your neighborhood because the neighborhood is no longer a reality. It means we need more of what is going on here than we ever needed in history because no church can reach everybody or even the majority of people in a region. We are all elective Sunday school classes in God's great church in our city. Because instead of all geography thinking alike, it's all little echo chamber of your choice. One of the ways I show how divided we've come, is there anybody here who can name, and you're positive you won't make a mistake, all ABC, NBC, and CBS evening news anchor? Anybody here? I've asked this question for 10 years, nobody knows. If I asked that question 20 years ago, everybody would have known. Why? Because there's so many options. And in a highly polarized echo chamber world, you need to understand this. You're going to reach the people you reach well, and you're going to need the help of others to reach those who are not in your echo chamber. I know idealistically we wish, would all of you agree? I hate the echo chamber world we live in. Would you agree? But it's not going to change, and here's why. Those of us that hate the echo chambers are unwilling to give up the choice that creates echo chambers. That's why I say it's unchangeable future. I'm not willing to go back to 3 television stations and 2 AM radio stations in LA that I got to listen to. I want these choices. And so if those of us who most hate the age of rage, the echo chamber, and all of that we're living in, if we're not willing to give up choices, I want to tell you our culture, our world's not going to give up choices. So here's my thing. How are you linking arms with the other churches in your community, not to celebrate Easter together, not to have a work day together, but to speak well of one another day in and day out, to buy chairs for one another when a church is planting, to come alongside and help, to let your people go gladly, to let... You know, we all have a heart for the kingdom and church planting as long as it's overseas and more than 35 minutes away. It won't work anymore. It won't work anymore. Here's the second of the things changing. We live in a world of time shifting, not only echo chambers, tribal, highly tribal, but we live in a culture of time shifting. My dad's 92 years old. My mom is 88, I believe. She thinks she's 39. Every show they watch is time shifted. Every show. And just as I don't know anybody under 40 who has cash, I don't know anybody under 30 who has cable. Everybody's time shifting. And so if you ever happen to be in a car, rental car, something like that, and you actually listen to AM radio, they have like a news or whatever, they're usually connected with the evening news show, and it tells you, hey, tune in at 6 and 10, and you'll see the cat caught in the tree or whatever it would be, right? Do any of you tune into the news at 6 and 10? Of course not. I already heard it 5 hours ago, and I saw the YouTube clip. Why am I going to watch you? But they're still saying tune in at 6 and 10 in a time-shifting culture. Like I said, my 92-year-old dad, every show he watched this year was time shifted. For a while, I thought, no, when we all had a big Super Bowl party at my house, it wasn't. Then I realized, no, we celebrated my mom's birthday at halftime, so we froze it, so the whole second half was time shifted. Everything's time shifted. But so practically, what are we doing? We're saying, hey, if you want the good news, tune in at 9 and 11 on Sunday. And other than that, you ain't getting it. Though 24 to 26% of people work on Sundays and can never come at 9 and 11. Though all kinds of things are going on in the world, when you're reaching lost people, they're used to everything being time shifted. And they come into this world, and now the cultural shock is not an organ. The cultural shock is 9 and 11. Are you kidding me? Practically, here's what that means. We got to quit building bigger and bigger buildings so we can have more and more services. Because the bigger your building gets, the harder it is to start something small. Our case, on a weekend, we run around 1,300 and kids and adults that show up. It's kind of the average right now on a weekend. Our largest room is 850, and that's on purpose. The only people who wish we had a room of 4,000 we could fill 3 times are the speakers and the bands. We would love it. But the bigger the room gets, the harder it is to have more services. When we launch campuses, we want to launch with 2 services and get to 4 as soon as possible. Why? Because of this time-shifting culture. And I'm going to give you another piece that plays into it. The rise of the club program, the traveling squad. I'm sure it's that way here as it is back home for me. Some kid hits a home run in T-ball, took 3 errors to get around all 4 bases, but we call it a home run. And we know it was a winning score even though we didn't keep score. And Dad goes, oh my, he might get a D1 scholarship. And we put him on a traveling squad. And when are all the championship games? Sunday. And we're saying be here at 9 and 11. You think that's going to change the traveling squad? Help me out. No. Because you get vulnerable parents who believe if I don't maximize the potential of my kid, I'm the worst parent ever. And you get those who run those club programs, you ought to see their checkbook. They're making bank. You put those 2 things together, it ain't going away. It's only going to get bigger. But we're doing church like it hasn't shown up. What is the solution for reaching those people? I'll tell you what it is. Preach against them. That works. I hate traveling. This is personal opinion, okay? And I'm not judging you if in your life the Lord's leading you different. I'm just telling you personally. I hate traveling squads. I had one son who was of that level. But I knew this, he wasn't going to play in the NBA or run in the Olympics. And I'm raising a 32-year-old, not an 18 or 20-year-old. That's the finish line. So I didn't want to teach him church is very important, except when there's something more important called a tournament. Because I knew when he went away to college, he'd say church is very important, except for when you're tired, or you got an assignment, or your buddies are doing something. And then the parents complain, oh, my kid, I don't know what happened. What happened? You trained him. That's what happened. But guess what? My congregation has never heard what I just told you. And they never will. Because it won't do any good. I'm not preaching to get a burden off my chest. I'm preaching to change people and advance the kingdom of God. And so what I want to do is instead of preach and make all the people in club programs not come back, I just want to beat them at the game. Okay, we got Friday night. Okay, we got Saturday night. Okay, we got Sunday night. Okay, we got Thursday night. Okay, we got this. We have something like 60 worship options at North Coast Church you could go to if you count our local campuses and times and slots. Because I want to be all things to all people and might reach some rather than railing on an unchangeable culture. Because when I rail on the unchangeable culture, it's kind of like I go to South America where instead of linear time, they actually use relational time. And I decide every service has to start on time. I'm the only one there. My wife shows up 5 minutes later, the congregation half hour later for benediction. Or I roll with the culture. In a time-shifting culture, what are you doing to reach those time-shifting people? Those of you that... those of you church planning right now, you're the fish and water of a younger generation. But those of you who aren't, I want to tell you, 5-10 years from now, you will not have many young families in your church if you only have Sunday morning. You've heard that gripe. Oh, people used to come 2 times a month. Now they only come once a month. You've heard that kind of stat? Here's the problem with it. Nobody's explaining why. It's very simple. Club programs. Club programs and a decent economy that allows people to get away for the weekend is why they're at your church less. But they won't be at your church less if you provide more options. But you go 9 and 11. Or you build a bigger building so you can have less services. Great, that's great. You'll reach less people. And you'll have more free time. So, anyway, that's why God invented video. Solves that problem anyway. So, let me give you one more and then we'll end. The loss of brand loyalty. Companies spend tons and tons of money to create a brand. But your brand is no longer the brand you thought you created. Your brand is what Yelp says you are. There's a certain brand of car I've had numerous ones of. And my buddies have had it. We all like it. It's dependable. It's a good car. Well, recently I had to buy a new car. And so what did I do? I didn't buy another of that same brand blindly because they're always good. I got online and checked what are the ratings on that model of that year. The whole brand loyalty is gone. Okay. I'm going to go for it. I got to get on a plane and leave. How many of you get frustrated at consumer Christians? Come on, be honest. Okay. Stop it. Here's why. Because you're a consumer. Everybody who makes a choice is a consumer. Everybody. And so in this brand loyalty thing, what we do is we get mad at our people because their kids suddenly, we saved their marriage, we saved whatever it would be, and now their kids go over here to this other church, and we're like, oh, how horrible is that, and they got a better band, and we lost these people to it. It's like, hello. First of all, their loyalty needs to be to Jesus, not to you. Do you think Starbucks gets upset when I stop going to this one and start going to that one? The store manager doesn't like it. But Starbucks doesn't care. What about when I go to Seattle's Best? They don't care either because they own that too. In this day and age where we need one another and all of this, where we're all elective Sunday school classes, we've got to get over our brand loyalty expectations because we don't have any brand loyalty. I had a professor, just the most gracious guy. I just love him. By far my favorite professor. One of these guys, even when he was wrong, he won the argument because he was so gracious and so brilliant. There's only one discussion I ever won with him. And that was he didn't like big churches. or consumerism, though that wasn't the word used then. He called it compromise or whatever to reach people. And so I kept telling him, well, we have, our marketing budget is literally zero. So we're 100% word of mouth church from our early days to whatever. That's not theology. I'm not down on marketing. That's just a reality. So I would say to him, well, what am I supposed to do? The guy who put it, the no room in the inside is not the hero of the story. We've got to figure a way to take these people. They're coming. I think Jesus is bringing them. And then the second thing is, will you let me pick the Bible-believing, Jesus-honoring church you and your family go to for the next 3 years? Of course not. Well, then you're a consumer. You're just a niche consumer. You don't like Walmart. You don't like Target. You like the little mom and pop, the off-brand. And I want to tell you, it is so freeing when we quit thinking our people owe us brand loyalty and we understand they owe loyalty to Jesus. We quit complaining about consumer Christians and we meet them where they are so they can become who they aren't. That's what it's about. Now, we're not an attractional church, so I'm in a camp that sometimes rips on attractional churches, and I always think that's so unfair because Jesus was rather attractional. I mean, I don't know about you, but raising the dead, healing leopards, blind people, and all that, before you speak, would kind of get a crowd. Right? This is the world we live in. This is the world you're doing ministry in. And here's my question as I close. Does your ministry reflect these realities? Or does it reflect a time frame 15, 20 years ago where these were not so true? Thanks. God bless. I hope that was helpful. Well, in the last session, we talked about what we're seeing and not seeing. I said I want to be at our head and the way we do ministry, and especially like that picture on the card, how maybe our definition of discipleship or some of our certainty about governance and some of our observations about the culture and what it's like might be not really the same. But this time I want to switch to something else where I think we can have a blind spot, and that is simply how we approach the way we do ministry and what we feel God wants from us versus maybe what Scripture says God wants from us. I like to title this talk either how to plant a church or how to grow a church and still have a life. Because there was a day and age, and thank God, it's mostly over, but the people my folks' age who were pastors often had this idea that it's better to burn out for God than anything else. And if I take care of my flock, God will take care of my family. And of course, it didn't happen. And there was story after story of kids who were turned off to Jesus Christ and walked away from the Lord, not because of anything the Lord did, but because of things their parents did in a misguided sense of calling and responsibility. My first 3 years at North Coast Church, Nancy and I still to this day call the dark years. So let me give you a little background to them. I had been a youth pastor. First of all, I came to Jesus right before my senior year of college. I fell deeply in love with the Bible. It just was like, this thing has an answer for everything by principle, if not specific. And so I would learn something one day and teach my friends the next day. So I started a Bible study in my home, and the house filled up. And then here's how spiritual I am. Here is why I'm in vocational ministry, the honest truth. I'm teaching these Bible studies while I'm going to college and working and doing all this, and I have 2 days off, and both those nights I teach Bible studies. Lots of people come, the house kind of fills up, and I had this church come to me, and they said, would you be a youth pastor? What's that? Well, we want you to teach Bible studies and do socials. You mean you want me to do what I'm doing now? Yeah. And you're going to pay me? I said, yeah. I said, let me pray about it. I'm in. So really, I'm in vocational ministry because what I discovered is I actually can make a living doing what I used to do for free. which means I don't complain very much about the dark sides of ministry. But this was a hard time because that had grown quick. The 2 youth ministries I'd had were at larger churches where the ministry was in a mess, and then I come in and I'm the hero because I make it grow. But of course, I think I make it grow. I don't realize the fertile ministry ground I'm starting in. And now I go to a church plant. I did not plant North Coast Church, so a lot of people think I did. I'm the founder. There's a founder-builder type relationship. I'm more the builder. But it was a church plant. It was only a year and a half old. We were meeting in the high school cafeteria with plexiglass windows on the side and skateboarders outside the window who were much more interesting than the preacher boy. My office was a parishioner's garage, and my desk was literally taken out of the trash from the Baptist church I'd been a youth pastor at. So, and if you knew my pay, I was a church planter, more or less, okay? So I know that world. But I expected everything to explode with growth like it had, and it didn't. After 3 years, we had grown by one person. Now, if you're challenged at math, that means a third person a year. Okay, not exactly exciting church growth. And I went and I would sit on the beach, which I love the beach, and all I could do is, instead of what depression is, I couldn't enjoy the moment. I just kept knowing it won't last very long. They're going to fire me. Won't last very long. They're going to fire me. Well, what was happening at that point was I was getting lots of phone calls. Because on my very first Sunday, I think there were 70 adults, 128 when you count all the rugrats, little kids around. Quickly grew to about 95 or so adults, 150 total. And then that's where we froze for the next 3 years. 3 years later, 151. And during that time, I would get this phone call. Many of you have had it, especially those of you lead pastors. Hey, pastor, I want you to know I love you in the Lord. Which you know is code for you're not going to like what you hear next, right? And they were leaving the church. Now, in my stupidity, because instead of counting faces, I was counting numbers, I kept feeling like we were going nowhere. What God was actually doing was getting rid of about 100 people who didn't want to go where God was calling us to go, and bringing 100 people who were going to be the foundation of everything God would do in the future. But because I was into numbers instead of faces and stories, I was totally blind to that. Still to this day, when my home phone rings, I have Pavlov's dog's response. My stomach, I'm not lying to you. After those 3 years, my stomach still churns every time I hear the ring of a home phone, because I know it's going to be another one of those calls. Well, during that time, I had a mentor who kept telling me this phrase, and a few of you, I've been around, done some coaching, mentoring, I've told it to you. Wally kept saying, Larry, you have nothing to prove and no one to impress. You have nothing to prove and no one to impress. And what he was trying to help me do was learn how to do ministry in the joy of the Lord, serving the Lord, rather than trying to prove something and impress someone. And what I believe is a lot of us in ministry have a hard time having a life because we have a father wound, or we have something else that tells us we're not good enough. We have something else that tells us more. And we get blessed like crazy, and we're still depressed. Think about it. 150 people. That was more than we ever were going to fit in my living room. And they were paying me. Not much, but they were paying me. I should have been on cloud 9. And instead, I'm sitting at the beach all depressed because my friend's church was growing quicker, because the past things I'd done better, because some of the dreams of who I thought I would be, it looked like I would never be. I'm amazed God didn't just nail me with a little lightning bolt right then and there. He goes, I'm preparing for you things beyond what you would ever imagine, and you're sitting here griping and complaining. And for some of us, that's what he's doing right now. And you're going to experience in this lifetime those kind of victories, kind of the first part, the first 3 quarters of Hebrews 11. Don't you love that section? All the victories and all that. But then there's those last few verses where he says, you too are committed for your faith. You too are getting the reward. It's just not going to be in this lifetime. We have nothing to prove. We have no one to impress. And building on that, I want to share with you 6 lessons that no one taught me about doing ministry, that by the end of the 3rd year I've learned. and why all the rest of the years? I've had the hard moments. We've gone through our Job-like experiences personally, ministry-wise. Classic coup attempt that founder builders get around 3,000. All of those things. But I can tell you, ministry has been a joy to my wife, to my kids, and to me because of these principles. So let me share them with you. 6 things no one told me. Number 1, create the church and ministry you'd want to go to. Make it your goal to create a ministry, or if you're a church planter, the church that you would want to go to, not the one that's big. Because the church or ministry you would want to go to if you're in a staff situation is the only one you were gifted, you are wired, and you were equipped to lead. Everything else you're going to battle in Saul's armor. And it's kind of interesting to me. Like when Willow Creek was on its fast rise up, though, at that point the most well-known church, etc., and they were having their leadership conferences, people would go to their leadership conference, and what would happen is they'd come back and they decide they're going to be a seeker-targeted church, which is fine. All right, remember, I talked about the body of Christ, so this is not a rip on Willow or seeker churches at all, but it's simply this. They'd come back and want to be a seeker-targeted church, and I go, dude, you don't have 3 non-Christian friends. And if you lived in Barrington, you wouldn't go to that church because you want different kind of teaching. The only reason you want to be a seeker-targeted church is because you want a big crowd in a food court. And there is so much that we do in ministry that way that isn't in tune to how God wired us, but what someone else is doing who's successful. And it will kill us. So you love deep theology, and you love Hebrew and Greek word studies, and you're a church planner. Can I tell you this? Your church will not be big. But can I tell you this? It will probably honor Jesus. Because you're going to reach people my Walmart church will never reach. But don't rip on me, because I'm reaching people who you will never reach either. We're all in this together. And what happens is we preach the body of Christ. We don't believe the body of Christ. Someday I want to write a book called Empty Words. And just look at all the things we say but don't really believe. Body of Christ, we already saw that one. In this area, we see it. We criticize other churches because they're small or they're not very good. In this area, you're just not missional enough. You're not evangelistic enough. You're not this or that enough. And we totally violate the body of Christ. Totally violate it. Priesthood of believers would be another one. Radical grace and mercy. There's all these things we say but don't believe. And when it comes to doing your church, God wired you the way he wired you on purpose. Don't be apologetic of it. Just go and do it. Because at the end of the day, the health of your church is more important than the numbers of your church if you're willing to speak well of and cooperate with the other churches in your community. There's this church growth myth. You've probably heard it. Healthy things grow and multiply. Heard that one? Okay. Sounds cool. Sounds like it's got general revelation, observation of the universe behind it. That's how things go. All healthy things will grow and multiply. You look in the mirror, you're not growing and multiplying, you must be unhealthy. Really? Have you ever noticed the only people who teach that are people with really big, fast-growing churches? It's a way for us to pat ourselves on the back. And have you ever stopped and really thought about that for a moment? Any of you ever take a biology course? Help me out. What things grow and multiply throughout their lifetime? Bacteria. The lowest things on the food chain. The higher you rise on the food chain, the more you have a season of growth and multiplication. There's this myth out there. And so a lot of us beat ourselves up because we're trying to have a growing church instead of a healthy church. We're doing whatever someone else is doing instead of whatever God put in us. And again, like I said, we're going to battle in Saul's armor and we're wondering why we're losing the war. You can't do it. You can't do it. And it's really okay if your church is small and stable and not growing as long as the kingdom is growing. When the Lord said, I will build my church, he didn't mean your 503c1. He meant his church. And I keep saying this phrase over and over. It's a mindset we try to have at North Coast Church. We are an elective Sunday school class in God's great church in San Diego. And that changes everything about how we talk about and relate to the other churches in our town. And who we judge and who we get all excited about and whatever it would be. Now, let me get real practical with this. And by the way, this is description, not prescription. Okay? Say it. It is what? Description, not prescription. Because some of you are going to go, like what? I'm just going to tell you a reflection. The reason our Bible studies are what we are, we're a church that goes through books of the Bible. Pretty long sermons. Our sermons are 50 minutes or so. I think we're in Mark and we're in like message 48 right now. 50 through Genesis, 62 through Luke, God knows how many through Romans, whatever. And so I could stand up and say the way to grow a church and a way to do that is expository teaching through books, verse by verse. But you want to know the honest truth? The reason we teach that way is that's how I learn. It's not, you catch this difference. If you don't learn that way, you learn topical, be topical. Don't listen to all the people who learn like I learn and stand up and say their church is big because they teach this way and do that. It's all garbage. They're reflecting their stuff on you. And by the way, if you like topical things and somebody like me is ragging on you for doing that, just look at them and say, well, I'm not topical. I'm just doing systematic theology. And they'll get off your case. I happen, and my wife is the same, we come from extended families that all live nearby. So, again, you're giving me grace, right? If not, I'll get on a plane. The last place I want to be on a holiday is at church. The very last place I want to be. I don't want to be there Christmas Eve. I don't want to be there Christmas Day. I don't want there the night before Thanksgiving. I want to be cleaning up the house. I barely want to be there on Easter. I'm just going to hell. Easter's okay. Good Friday, forget it. And I'm betting there's a number of you just like that. Well, guess what we do on Christmas Eve? We have at our Vista campus outdoor at 6 and 8 o'clock at night, standing room only, a service. A church that gets 13,000 on a weekend might draw 5,000 on Christmas Eve. Guess who hasn't shown up for the last 12 years? Just go through our team, go, hey, who likes this? We find one of our bands. Yeah, we like it. We find one of our teachers who, his whole family loves the event. And so we do a few songs. We do a little Devo. We do that candle thing where you pass it out and it all lights up and clean up the act. And I'm home when the kids were younger fixing a bike. And all my friends were going, we got to do Christmas Eve. It's the biggest, fanciest thing. And then the church got really big. And I have one guy, he was texting us that, hey, we're having 45 services, 150,000. And I'm going, I feel sorry for you. And I bet all of your staff hates being on staff at this church. And if the staff don't hate it, the kids of the staff hate it. And here's the thing. Our church, our size, ought to have 20, 25,000 on Christmas Eve. Would you agree? Those kind of the standard thing if we put on the dog and pony show. And we have 5. That means our people are going somewhere else on Christmas Eve. But guess what? They're back next week. And I decided I don't want to provide the holiday entertainment for the community. Now I have other friends who love providing the holiday entertainment for the community. I have other friends who, by the way, our biggest growth is in January. They say it's our Christmas Eve service. I go, no, it's January, but whatever. But here's the thing. You can have all of those dog and pony shows and do all of that stuff, but if you hate it, why are you doing it? Is it really advancing the ball down the field for the kingdom, or is it just because every other church is doing it and you can't imagine another church having your people show up on Christmas Eve or Good Friday or Thanksgiving? It's like, whatever. They'll be back. Don't worry. When you build the ministry or plant the church you'd want to go to, every day's a good day. When you build the ministry that someone else built so you can prove something to someone, every day is a day of labor. I want to encourage you to look in the mirror and say, am I reflecting? Now, by the way, this doesn't mean you get to be a selfish pig. Servant leadership puts other people first. So in the early days of North Coast Church, it's church plant day when we had just 5, 6 staff members. Here's what happened. Here's what I think servant leadership called me to do. It called me to say, we're not going to have a big dog and pony show. And I'm going to tell all the staff that has family, go ahead and leave town, whatever it would be. And I will hire a local Christian group, and they will come in and do some drama thing, you know, Christmas Carol or whatever it would be. And I'll open it up, and I'll close it up, and I'll be the guy who's stuck here until we have enough other people that want to be here. So I want you to catch that. It didn't mean I got to be a selfish pig, but it did mean I was going to make our church the church I'd want to go to, not the church I had to work for. And I think that would make a huge difference for a lot of you. And you're always going to be more successful being you than you're going to be being someone else. Does that make sense? Here's the second one. Learn to fulfill your calling, not your potential. Learn to fulfill your calling, not your potential. And this is a huge one. I mentioned in the last session a phrase I like to use. We're all like fish in water. You ask the fish, how's the water? It goes, what water? Because that's all it knows. When it comes to potential, we live in a culture that has 2 gods. And the people in our churches have these gods, and many of us have these gods still in the back of our head. The sex goddess. We can't imagine a life without sexual experience, even though Jesus talked about some people being a eunuch for kingdom and all kinds of things. But the one I want to talk about is the other one. It's the potential goddess. We believe the worst life lived is the life that doesn't reach its full potential. We believe the worst parent ever is a parent who doesn't maximize the opportunities for their sons and daughters because we bow the knee to the potential God. Here's the problem. If you're a follower of Jesus, the only person who will fulfill all of their potential for Jesus is the unmarried single person. That's what 1 Corinthians chapter 7 says. Paul says, man, in light of the things that are going on, and also so you can be fully devoted to the Lord, I want you to remain unmarried, right? And he says, but if you're going to burn, go ahead and get married. Then he throws in, and you've not sinned, but it's far better if you stay single, because then you can reach your full potential, 100% focused, because the moment you get married, you have a divided mind. You have both the Lord to please and the spouse to please, and you have not sinned. Do you catch what I just said? So I want to please the Lord. I want to do all I can for my Savior, but at the end of the day, I was going to burn, so I got married. Don't look at me that way. A lot of you do the same. But the moment I got married, guess what happened to my potential in ministry? It was cut back. I married a woman who's very rooted. You know, I'm an entrepreneurial teacher, visionary, all of this kind of stuff. And I married a gal with gifts of helps and mercy, who is also ethnically an Armenian, and both her grandparents sole survivors of the Turkish genocide, so there's some of that rootedness in there. And you want to know why Nancy and I have spent a lifetime in one community and felt called to go to community, set down roots, stay there no matter what happened? It's because of the woman I married. Because the Bible says when 2 become one, they become a new one, not a battle to see which one. And so she was part of a new, which, guess what? Truncated opportunities that if I was single, I would have taken. Because I had 2 people to please, Jesus and my wife. And I'm amazed how many people, when it comes to, well, does God want me to do this? The prayer is all about what will create the most ministry and help me reach my full potential, instead of, well, what about the kids? What about this? Does this make sense? Your calling is not your potential. My calling is to maximize Nancy, to present her in all of her beauty and all of her glory before the Lord as God made her to be, not as I want her to be. That's my calling, and that's yours. Well, then we had a son. another chip on my potential. Then I had a daughter, another chip on the potential. Then we had a mistake by the lake. Another chip. And he knows it. He thinks it's fun. But here's what that means. I've had 4 huge chips in my potential to be all I could be for Jesus and do all I could do for Jesus. Because each time we had a child, my calling shifted. Getting real practical again, description, not prescription. I was writing my 3rd book, and my oldest son was 7, and Nathan told Nancy, I don't like it when Dad writes, he doesn't play with me. Now, in his 7-year-old mind, that was true. In my mind, are you kidding me? This is 2 weeks. I got a deadline. I'm doing this. Give me a break. But that night, here's what we decided. I'm not writing another book till all 3 kids are in college. Because my calling is to be a great husband, a great dad, a pretty good pastor, and my potential is with writing. And if some of you read my books, you know I've written quite a few books, and it seemed like about a number of years ago they all came out. That's because Josh got in college. And that meant for 13 or 15 years, I went completely off the radar. We were one of the larger churches no one knew anybody about, because if you're not writing books, you're not speaking at the conference, you're not having the influence here, you're not doing that, just trying to be a good dad and a good pastor. And I got 3 kids who love Jesus. 3 kids who think dad being a pastor was a very cool job instead of a really rotten job. Why would I trade that for a couple thousand more people? Why? Why? Why would I think your marriage falling apart, which has been falling apart for the last 3 years, is more important than my kid's ball game? Which I have no idea what's going to happen. You know, if you've fallen into the trap of quality time, you've fallen into a deep devil trap. Because there's no such thing as quality time. Quality flows out of quantity. You know, I never knew, just to pick sports, because I mentioned that a couple of kids were in it. It was a Connect Fun thing in our family. I never knew when my kid was going to hit the home run or go off and score a bunch of points or whatever it would be. He didn't send a text saying, Dad, next game, that's going to be the game. It's just being there. And everybody has a crisis, and they're going to pull you away from your family. And they're going to pull you away from responsibilities. And you're going to have a spouse or you're going to have kids who think that there's a mistress out there called the church. Never let that happen. Lose people before you lose your church. Your family. Because it's amazing to me. Like, I mean, we all get that call. It's my kid's birthday party. And I'm there and somebody calls and says, my husband just left me. And they want me to stop everything and come over right then and there. Right? You been there? Okay. Well, where were you the last year and a half while all of this problem was going? Pretending there wasn't a problem. That's where you were. Saying, fine, it's all great. It's all whatever. Again, this is description, not prescription. You've got to work out your own thing. But in terms of calling versus potential, everybody wanted to meet with me in the evening when our church was small. There were just a couple on staff. And so I had to just learn to say, you know what? Everybody wants me to stay one more night to meet with them, to help them with their problem. But you're going to end up with a divorced pastor or a pastor bailing his kids out of jail if I'm out every night. So I'm going to ask you to do what you do for your dentist, what you do for your doctor, what you do for your everything else. I'm going to ask you to meet me at these times. And you know what? When I put it that way, I hardly had anybody get upset. And I got home. And on top of that, the ones who got upset and they left the church, that's called divine subtraction. Right? I don't need more selfish pigs in my church. But we get controlled by selfish pigs. Does this make sense to you? So here's my question. What is your calling, not what is your potential? Because Imagine I'm a musician who serves a king. And he had this huge party, and what he wants is, after every party, his goal, in fact, Nancy and I actually live by this when we host things, we want to wake up the next morning as if nothing happened. So like in a couple of weeks, we're going to have like 50 some odd people over for dinner, but the next morning it'll look like nothing happened. We stay up late, that's just how we like it. So let's say the king was that way. And you don't like working in the kitchen, you break things in the kitchen, so you sneak off and you go sit at a keyboard and you write an anthem of praise to your great king. Is he going to be pleased? No. Because what he wanted is all hands on deck cleaning out the kitchen so tomorrow looks great. You can't hide behind, yeah, but I'm no good at that, or yeah, your calling is your calling. And I want to stand before Jesus and hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And stand before my wife and kids and say, he was a good husband, he was a great dad. Far more than I want to be known as a great pastor. And I think a lot of us would rather be known as a great pastor than a great dad, a great mom. It gets us in trouble. One last little thing on this, and I'll move on to the next one. Many times, some of you were born with the guilt gene. Little guy sits on your shoulder and whispers in your ear all the time, okay? And some of you have maybe woo as one of your gifts, which means you're a people pleaser, which is a great gift, but all gifts have their dark side. So, and the G guilt, if it's not overwrought, is not a bad thing either. But they all have their dark side. And here's the thing. Sometimes we're so afraid of disappointing people, we don't realize how little the disappointment is. We think we're more important than we are. There's a couple of staff members. At North Coast, we use this phrase, you're just the flowers. Here's what that means. My daughter was the last one to get married of my 3 kids. We had just moved from Barrio Warehouses, where we were for 18 years, to this beautiful new campus facility. We had in one of our venues, the Edge, probably the best sound system, light systems, hazers, anything of any place in San Diego to put it. So I get to put on. Plus, I'm older. We got a little more money. It's the last one. It's the daughter. We're putting on the dog. So we put on this wedding for her that was just a blast for Dad to do, and she was pretty happy with it too. But there was a florist and there was a baker we wanted. We went to them and said, man, we love your stuff. We want you to do the flowers. And she said, I'm booked. And we said, oh, no, really? Well, what if we do this? What if we do that? You know what? We would pay to have these people get another florist and you do this. And in other words, we did everything we could to try to get this florist. And when it came to the baker, this baker, both of which were booked. And at the end of the day, they couldn't do it. And we walked out, I'm sure, leaving them with a message. They had wrecked the wedding, that life was terrible. And you know what we did? We got in the car and went to another florist, got in the car and went to another baker, and we had a heck of a wedding. I never thought of it again until I was illustrating it. But you know, in their mind, they're going like, oh, they want it so bad. Could we do this? Could we do that? Do you see where I'm going with this? That's happening to you all the time. They're still going to have a good 50th anniversary if you don't show up. Okay? You know, the funeral could still go on if you don't stop the vacation. There's so many things at which you and I think we are more special than we are, and we are just the flowers. And their disappointment is passing. And if their disappointment is so great it's not passing, you just had another divine subtraction. And if we can get that through our head, it frees us up. Because again, I want to be a servant leader to our congregation. I think they would say that's a style of leader that I've been. But I want my family to think I was even a greater servant leader to them. Third, focus on the flock you have, not the flock you hope to shepherd someday. Focus on the flock you have, not the flock you hope to shepherd someday. This was my big mistake during my first 3 years, those dark years, along with many other mistakes. But one of them was I looked at the flock I had and I saw them as tools to reach the flock I wanted to have instead of people to care for. And when they weren't helping me reach the people I wanted, I just got annoyed and frustrated at them. If I planned an event and they didn't show up at the event, I didn't think maybe it's because I had a crappy event. I thought it was their fault because they weren't supporting me in my dream and my vision and all of that. And I think a lot of times we look at the people we have, and Scripture says, 1 Peter 5, shepherd the flock among you, not use the flock among you. And a lot of times we can use them to reach the people we want. It's no wonder our church didn't grow very much during that time. And what happened was, untold part of the story is, at the end of those 3 years, one of the release points happened. I went down to the beach, did some journaling, and I had this little notebook of dreams. And they described everything from physically and financially, the home I'd want to live in someday. They described some of the writing. They described the kind of marriage we wanted, just kind of dreams. And one of those was to pastor a church of 1,000 or more. Well, when your church of 150 is growing 1/3 a person a year, you're going to have to be Methuselah to get there. And so I remember taking out that sheet of paper, tearing it up and throwing it away and thinking, maybe I had all my success in the past because I started at third base. I'm not quite as gifted as I think I am. And I'm just going to take care of the people I have. And by the time we're done, hopefully we'll hit 200, 300, 400. I can't tell you what that did. Because I quit worrying about who I wasn't reaching and started focusing on who God had placed in front of me. And the weirdest thing happened. They started bringing their friends. Now, in hindsight, I understand why. Because the first 3 years, once you come to North Coast, they use you. Nobody does that. It became once you come to North Coast, they help you. And if you're angry at your flock, you're angry at your community, you're frustrated with them, you'll never be a good leader. You'll never be a good leader. Oh, they're too educated. They're not educated enough. They're too rich. They're too poor. No, they're your flock. Embrace them. Love them. Shepherd them. Don't wish for another flock. God will give you the flock he wants to give you. It's not by accident. It's not by mistake. And then you just see what will happen. Focus on the flock you have, not the people you want to reach. Which, by the way, a little sub of that is, if I'm focusing on the flock I have, I'm going to pay more attention to closing the back door than opening the front door. And most of us have been trained to work on opening the front door. And as long as the front door is bigger than our back door, we think we're growing. But you ought to know what the back door is and why people are going through it. If it's because they moved, if it's because another church is ministering better to them, all that, those are fine reasons. But if I've lost the people because I didn't care for them, it's not going to be long until the word on the street is, I used to go there, which is the end, the end of any momentum that you would ever have. Fourth, this comes back to the family thing. Don't live like a pastor. Live like a mature Christian. Don't live like a pastor. Live like a mature Christian. We've talked about the priesthood of believers. Here's one of the goals that I think created health for my children, my wife, and for me as well, is I decided the moral standards and life issues, all the various areas where there's gray areas in freedom in Christ, that I was going to live my life the same way I would if I was a Christian plumber. Not any different because I'm a Christian pastor. If you begin to have a pastor image that is different than a Christian plumber image, you're creating poison in your soul, and you're creating poison probably in your kid's soul, and you're creating poison in the plumber's soul as well. Because basically you're telling in the priesthood of believers where we need to be a church for Monday, if a plumber can live to a lower standard than a pastor can, not the character qualities of Timothy and Titus, the standard there, if they can live to a lower quality standard, they're not as important, right? And God forbid the one where you go, you live like a pastor in town, but like a plumber when you're on vacation. You know the drill, right? Well, I don't do this here, but I do it there. I've got all kinds of pastor friends who do that. I won't drink this, eat this, watch this, touch this, whatever, when I'm in town, but when I'm out of town, that's a different thing. I go, dude, are you kidding me? Because here's why. What you see as discretion, your kids are seeing as hypocrisy. If you at the dinner table are ripping on somebody on their farewell Sunday, you're standing on this stage and it sounds like the second coming of Jesus is leaving. Your kids aren't thinking, wow, he's really good and knowing how to handle a crowd and all that. They're thinking he's a hypocrite. And if you don't do it when you're in your town or your parish or your church, but you do it when you're somewhere else, they're not thinking how wise you are. They're thinking how disingenuous you are. I know this well because I had a couple pastors' friends whose dads lived by that pattern. And here's the thing about our children when they watch us. They pick up our values but not our boundaries. Have you noticed that? They pick up our values, not our boundaries. So, for instance, somebody calls and I tell my kid, well, tell them I'm not here. The value I'm presenting is when it's convenient, lie. Right? But I think I'm giving them a value and a boundary. When the debt collector calls, when Aunt Martha calls, and when John calls, I'm not here. But other than that, I'm here. We think it's value and boundary. No, it is values. They make their own boundaries. So suddenly their senior year, they get busted because they've been telling us they're going to the library to study. They've been going to Sue's house for other things. And I go, why would you lie to me? And it's like, Dad, you taught me. You taught me back to what I talked about club sports. You taught me a value system. And our kids, amazingly, any of you have been youth pastors, you know how that works, that 5-6 years after they're out of your youth group, the majority of them are more like their family of origin than they were in the youth group because values are passed on. I wanted to make sure my kids saw, there's always going to be sin and hypocrisy in everybody, there is in me, but I want to make sure they saw as little as possible. That what you see is what you get. And in our life, again, description, not prescription, there are certain areas, Romans 14 and 15 talks about, those areas, eating meat, not eating meat, where they asked Paul, who's right? Sabbath, keep it, not. And he says, you're both right, quit arguing with each other. So we all have Romans 14 and 15 areas of personal legalism, which is a good thing. The Lord told me. The bad thing is when I say he told me, so he meant it for you. Okay? You would probably be shocked if you knew some of the legalism I have in my life. There are certain rigid areas, people like, what? I just go, Lord told me. But you'd also be probably shocked at little areas of freedom as well. But here's what Nancy and I decided. We sat down the beginning when we first came there and said, if God blesses us with kids, when it comes to all these debatable issues, let's make our decision right now so we will be the same thing in San Diego that we are in New York. And if we lose some people in San Diego, God bless them, they're just going to go somewhere else. But we will able to be who we are. Make sense? Number 5. Do your best, then take a nap. Do your best, then take a nap. Proverbs 21, 30 and 31 is a favorite passage of mine. No victory, no counsel against the Lord. The horse is prepared for battle, but victory belongs to the Lord. My job is to prepare the horse. His job is to decide whether I win or lose. And we put way too much emphasis on whether we win or lose. And we judge ourselves by whether we're winning or losing, though everything in Scripture would say that's not in our hands. Think of Joshua in the Battle of Ai after Jericho, right? They were commanded, the principle of first fruits, the first city, everything in it goes into the treasury. After that, the fruit is yours. but the first fruit goes to God. So they conquer it. Everything goes in the temple treasury except for one idiot named Achan. And he hides a couple devoted things under the tent, right? And then they go up against little old Ai and they are destroyed. 33 guys die. Sons don't come home. Dads don't come home. Horror happens. Why? Because Joshua had a bad battle plan? No, because Achan brought sin into the camp. Now, I want you to catch this. There's an unseen realm. I don't always know what goes on. Some of my charismatic friends, they got the name of every demon. I haven't got that one figured out, but I want to tell you, they're right about this. There is an unseen realm. And every now and then the Bible pulls back the curtain and says, it is real. It took 21 days for an angel to get with God's answer to Daniel. And in this story of Ai, pulls back the curtain and says it because of Achan. But let's imagine that it was like most of Scripture, most of life, where the curtain wasn't pulled back. Do you know how we would preach the story of Joshua in the battle of Ai? We would note that the text makes no mention of him seeking the Lord for a battle plan. We would make note of, we'd catch all this stuff, it'd all be Joshua's fault. And it was zero Joshua's fault. It was 100% Achan's. And that's why you need to do your best, prepare the horse, and then take a nap, because you can't beat yourself up. You don't know where there's an Achan in the camp. You don't know the unseen realm. I notice in my region, I'm sure it's here, there are areas where it's easier for the gospel to spread and areas where it's really hard. Oceanside, where I happen to live, is near Camp Pendleton, and there's a place called Hill Street that just has decades of generational sin from prostitution, drug use, traffic, all this stuff. And it is harder than daylight to plant a church in Oceanside. We were in Oceanside at one point in the migration of where we were, and I remember telling our board that as we moved across the city line into Vista and suddenly exploded. I don't know how that works, but there's an unseen realm. I can't take too much credit. I can't take too much blame. I mean, the flip side of Ai is Samson. I mean, that's a loser horn dog, right? And from the beginning of his story, right? You realize he reigned for 18 years successfully. He was just getting ready to get his leadership book published when all hell broke loose and Delilah showed up. See, God draws straight lines with crooked sticks. And sometimes God takes a Samson and causes that church, that ministry to look so wonderful and so successful. And God's just saying, dude, I'm using you and your time is up. And there's other times where you're as faithful as a Joshua and there's nothing that goes right. Your job is not to grow a big ministry. Your job is to grow a healthy ministry. Your job is to have a heart for the lost. Your job is to have a heart for discipleship. Your job is to be a servant leader. Your job is not measured by numbers. When the numbers are bad or not going anywhere, certainly you need to step back and look and say, is there something I'm doing? Are there roadblocks I need to remove? Are there rockets I need to light? But after I've done all those things, if I start thinking, well, it's all about numbers, I'm going to do what people do by that church growth myth, that everything grows and multiplies, it's healthy. They turn to steroids. And steroids will kill you. They'll make you bigger, but they'll kill you. And there's a lot of ministry steroids out there. They're called conferences. They're called books. They're called the latest, greatest Sunday school thing or small group thing or whatever. And we flock to them because the church is big. And our job was to do our best to take a nap. Now let me add one more thing to that. Those of you note takers, it's not just do your best, but add this phrase, under the circumstances. Do your best under the circumstances and then take a nap. Because here's the thing, men and women, you'll never do your best. You always could have done more. I always could have prepared a little more. I always could have prayed a little more. I always could have called that person. I always could have done that. Every single day of my life, there's more I could have done if I did my best. I'm not called to live my best. I can't live my best. You know, you play hurt during the playoffs. You can't play hurt during the regular season or you never make the playoffs. So if every time you finish a sermon, you lay down and say, was that best I could do? You're going to beat yourself up. Here's what you need to ask. Is that the best I could do under the circumstances? We used to have, before video came along and saved the day, we used to have 2 Saturday night services and then our Sunday ones. And at that point, I had young kids that were in the Little League and the club, not traveling squad, but the basketball programs and all that. And I felt God's calling was for me to be involved in their life, to be coaching those teams, to have the opportunity to rub shoulders. One of the best evangelistic periods of our life was when we were involved in sports with our kids from small school through high school. That was my calling. Well, I want to tell you that sometimes when you're trying to coach a bunch of kids in a Little League game and it's hot and the game goes an extra inning or God knows what, you show up at church and your sermon sucks because you're tired. And here's what I do. I lay in bed and go, well, that's the best I could do under the circumstances. Okay? Yeah, if I hadn't had the game, I hadn't had this, hadn't had that. Yeah, do you beat yourself up when you get a cold and you didn't do as well? Do you beat yourself up when you got the flu and you're not able to meet with somebody you needed to meet with or whatever? That's what I mean by take all of life. All you're responsible for is under the circumstances, did I do the best I could? Not did I burn myself out. And then last, give your kids the gifts they keep on giving. This is going to have a couple of quick subs. Before I say this, I need to do a disclaimer. I'm one of the lucky ones that have 3 grown kids that love Jesus, serve him actually for free. And so what can happen is I can say, here's a recipe that will cause your kids to walk with Jesus. Here's what we need to remember. In the Garden of Eden, you had perfect environment, you had the equivalent of perfect parenting, and you had no sin nature, and you had rebellion. Rebellion is not your fault. In fact, Ezekiel 18 and I think 21, the Lord says, I hate this proverb. Quit saying it. When the father eats sour grapes, the children's teeth are turned on edge. Each one is responsible for their own thing. So we tend to take too much pride when we have too much luck, good fortune, blessing, grace. And we beat ourselves up when kids make their own choices. But still, having said that, there are things we can do to increase the odds or decrease the odds. Would you agree with that? I don't create the outcome, but I do have influence. So real quickly, the gifts that keep on giving is number 1, a strong marriage. Do not allow your children to become more important than your spouse. My brother, sister, and I have all done fairly well in our chosen areas of life. And at my folks' 50th anniversary, we and all have a sense of kind of comfortable in our own skin who we are. And at my folks' 50th anniversary, we were all talking, and I'm the oldest, so I got to speak first. And at the end, we all had said the same thing. My way of putting it this was, Mom and Dad, I love how much you love each other. Growing up, I always had the sense that if we were out on a boat on the lake and the boat was going down and there were only 2 life jackets, you would have given them to each other. And then my sister says something similar. Then my brother says something similar. And my mom is crying because she thinks she's a loser. Like, right? And we're all going, no, you don't understand. That is the greatest gift you ever gave us. We always knew you loved Dad more than you loved us, and Dad, you loved her more than you loved us. It's not we didn't feel loved. We never could win and get between you. Where do kids try to set the moment they have a choice? Right between you. The greatest gift you can give a kid is not a school you can't afford. The greatest gift you can give a kid is not a community you can't afford or whatever. The greatest gift you can give a kid is that you love your spouse. Because when they see that, it's a model to them in the world of how Jesus loves us. Isn't that what he said? Don't let it become kid-centric. Second, value character over performance. We all nod our head but we all get excited about performance. GPAs and MVPs don't last. Character does. Any of you have kids in sports, you know how competitive those families are, and it always amazed me how they were so big into what college their kid get into, how many points their kid scored, whether they made All-League or not. Way back in Little League, being all upset, my kid should have made the All-Star team, didn't make the All-Star team and all that. I want to tell you, at 30 years old, nobody asked you what your GPA was or how many MVPs you won. And I made a quick pass at this earlier. If you and I would make our finish line when it comes to raising our children 30 instead of 18 or 21, we would parent very differently. A whole lot of things we get excited about or get our shorts all wadded up about wouldn't happen if we said 30 instead of 18 or 21. Because all those things that seem so important no longer matter. These people, we live in a day and age with all the student debt. It's people going to schools they can't afford to impress people they don't like. It makes no sense. At 30, nobody's asking whether you got it online, got it local, whether it was prestige. Nobody's ever asked me how many All-League awards I won. Nobody ever asked me what my scoring average was. Nobody's ever asked me GPA, all of these things. Character. I learned this from my dad. He was in education, and I was the underperformer kid. Until I found a subject I liked, I didn't do very well in school, and suddenly I did extremely well. And Dad would go to the teachers, and as Dad would describe it, also a little ADD, and so Dad would describe it this way. They'd go, "Oh, this is, I'm Sue's mom. Oh, Sue's mom, so happy to meet you. I'm Nathan's dad. Oh, so happy to meet you." And my dad would go, "I'm Larry's dad. Oh, nice to meet you." But he was so wise, he didn't even worry about some of the character grades, which just meant I was antsy and talked too much in class or whatever. What he'd always ask is he getting along with other kids, and he's respectful to you. It wasn't, could he get better grades? Yes. Could he do this? Yes. Could he get a better citizenship? Yes. But he knew those two things were the things that mattered. Does it make sense? And then I'll end with this one. Just make sure you pick your battles wisely. These all kind of fit together. Don't have time for all the ones I sometimes share, but one of the biggest mistakes I nearly made, except for thank God for Nancy, was my firstborn. If you look up strong-willed child or Google it, Nathan Osborne's picture will be there under images, right at the top. And I wanted to break his will, but I was breaking his spirit. Because the very things that have made him a young executive in a software industry, his ability to see the other side, why not, stand up for whatever, as a little kid made him argue why it was time to go to bed, why his room wasn't clean enough, right? All these things we hate in a kid, we love in a leader. All these things we love in a kid make them work for the leader. That's how it works. We like compliant kids who someday will be working for the non-compliant. And so what happened is I didn't pick my battles wisely. And somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, we began to realize too many of my conversations with my son are angry because he's so verbally quick and disagreeable. I am no longer seeing it as that's cool, you see something different in the world. I'm simply seeing it as you need to learn to respect authority. I had been spanked pretty much every day of my life during a period because I deserved it. My wife was spanked once by mistake, literally. So we saw the world differently. And thank God Nancy just sat down and just said, this is not working. We pulled in a friend to help us who we both respected who said, no, it's not working. And so I turned to her, and our rule for about 3 years was I can't discipline at all. Everything's going to run through you. Because I'm not picking my battles wisely. Because there are some things you need to discipline, but I'm not picking them wisely. And I'm so thankful. A, she stood up. B, through my dad, I had a model of two becoming one and listening to her. And I got a great relationship with that boy today. That'd probably be a repairing broken relationship because I did know how to pick the battles wisely. So that's my question for you. Is everything important? Because if it is, nothing's important. Hey, I hope today has just spoke to your head and spoke to your heart. And my prayer for all of you is you just embrace and love the fact that he's called you into ministry on the front lines. Such a cool thing. Enjoy it. Don't make it harder than it is. It'll have its own burdens. And wake up every day, realize, and especially those you paid, you're getting paid for what you used to for free. How cool is that? Thanks. God bless.
Hey, guys. So when we were talking earlier, first session, about the dual rail versus like the monorail approach, I think a lot of times in leadership, we have concrete goals to give to people. Hey, come lead this group, or come be an assistant leader in this group. And so it's easy to measure that and bring that into the monorail. So what are some consistent, concrete goals that you would give to someone that you were trying to disciple that may be outside the norm? You know what I mean? So like you may see someone with gifts of mercy or gifts of different kinds of
the non-leader, discipling the non-leader.
Yeah, discipling with concrete goals. What would be something you would say?
Well, first of all, I have a little phrase I use for all of life, parenting, ministry, discipleship, everything, and it's this: judge the fruit, not the watering schedule. Judge the fruit, not the watering schedule. How many of you, like my wife and I, we had a great marriage till we went to the marriage conference and found out we were doing everything wrong? Right? Usually presented by a guy who had a jacked up marriage and gives a recipe how he saved his marriage, and you go home feeling guilty you didn't have the date night or all the rules. So those are watering schedules. So I tell people, when the fruit is good, keep the stupid watering schedule you have. If the fruit is bad, Google watering schedule and try something else.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think when you ask, and I might be reading into it, but for a lot of us, when we ask the question, concrete things, what we're looking for is watering schedule things. And really the only thing that matters when it comes to discipleship is obedience, the next step of obedience. Think about it. If you love the Lord, if you love me, you will what? Obey me. Go into all the world, make disciples, baptize them, and teach them to obey everything, okay? Hereby we do know if we're really saved, 1 John 2. Hereby we do know if we know him, if we keep his commandments. And the one that says, I know him, but doesn't keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So discipleship from beginning to end is all about, are you obeying? But we always want to, accidental Pharisee, push it up a little bit. So instead of, are you resting on the Sabbath? Are you, Old Testament Sabbath, are you walking X amount? Are you healing this person as opposed to that? We're always adding to it. So I'm just going to drop a bomb and then I'll leave it. But some of the things that are watering schedule, but we've turned into measurement of discipleship, are being a self-feeding Christian, right? You want people to be self-feeding Christian. Would you all agree that's kind of a common thing? Mm-hmm. Well, if reading your Bible and journaling is the key or the mark of being a good disciple, then there were no disciples till Gutenberg came along. Right? I mean, nobody had a Bible by their nightstand. Nobody had daily devotions before Gutenberg, but they had obedience. So I tend to, the way I look at it is, can a doctor tell me that I'm healthy? Not really. He can say there's nothing I detect that's sick. Here's what a doctor's good at, detecting illness. And so my answer to that question and what we do with the discipleship is we're always teaching everything's the next step of obedience and different steps for different people at a different pace. We all take the same courses, but out of order. But here's what I look for. I don't look for watering schedule things to say, okay, you talk to a non-Christian about Jesus, you've done, all that list of the marks of a disciple. Those are watering schedule. Here's what I look for, sin. When I find sin, there's disobedience. So like a doctor, we're trying to, like in our small groups, even on our size, we still have real-time attendance and real-time feedback in our groups. So I can know who was in a group yesterday, because we want to attack sin and broken relationships and marriages and battles between people and dishonesty. That's where I know, okay, discipleship's not taking place, because we've all known people who were type A in all of the spiritual disciplines as they were in the middle of an affair.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a watering schedule. So that's what we do. We just try to say, are you walking and growing obedience? I don't have a list. By the time you die, I hope you've taken all these courses, but I don't have an order for them. But I do watch for sin.
Yeah, that's good.
Next question.
Who are some of your favorite authors? What are some of your favorite books you've read?
Favorite
authors or favorite books? Do you read fiction?
That's a watering schedule question, so I'll answer it only that nobody feels like, oh, I ought to try that if it doesn't hit your soul. I probably only read about 18 books a year, and probably 12 or 13 of them are because I've been asked to do the forward or an endorsement. I have this weird thing, I actually read a book I endorse. It's a really weird idea. I don't learn much from books. I learn from articles. Most books show up as articles first, so I spend about an hour to an hour and a half a day. Could be as little as 30 minutes. Remember, I just do my best, take a nap. But I have an online thing I've had for many years. I used to be a series of journals that exposed me to culture. So a normal day, it could be health, it could be TMZ and who Miley's hanging around with and God knows what. I was reading something on quantum physics the other day and why the multiple worlds theory is crazy. I read stuff on technology. Here's what it does. It helps me understand the world my men are in and women, but particularly men, since churches don't reach men well. We work hard at that. I want to understand the marketplace. And then there's a thing called associative learning, where you learn something over here that seems unrelated. It creates the aha over here. So I have found that I learn much more that way than books. My wife is a book person. So it's a little ironic, a guy who writes books. But that's how I learn, being as eclectic as I can. The thing I hardly ever read is theology, and hardly ever read is leadership, because those are two areas that I've got down pretty well. I still read. I don't want to become stale. But it's the other areas that I'm constantly having my eyes opened.
Yeah, that's good.
But again, that's a watering schedule. What do you guys do?
Before we take another question, I want to just shift gears for just a moment. I think you answered that extremely well. One of the things that I learned from you back it was in 1998, and one of my staff members, we had just started the church. We came and you guys gave us an afternoon, was how to do small groups. And I just think this is important because your church is a no-frills church. You have all these environments, which I love that, but you guys do, as you talked about, 50-minute sermons. You preach through, normally you're preaching through books, but then how many, is it 90-something% of your church is in a small group?
What we do, our benchmark, so you know what we're talking about, is we take average attendance in the month of October.
Okay.
And who's attending our small groups in October, not who signed up in September.
Okay.
And our benchmark, we've never been below 80, and for probably the last 12 years, we've been at 90 to 94.
Yeah. So everybody, this is what we learned from them, and this is what we do 22 years later. We preach, we have someone who writes notes, the small group notes, based on what we preach, sermon-based notes. That's what we learned from you. And that's what our small groups are talking about all week long. So everybody in the small group at North Coast, I think it's you guys were the only church we knew that was doing it like this, that we learned, and it was.
I think we were the first church that did that.
Yeah.
So.
And everybody's just having a chance to talk about what you guys just preached on, on Sunday. And
well, let me pick up on it. It plays to the discipleship thing. It plays also to reaching men, if that's a weakness in your church. Men don't like to read a pamphlet and write down answers to it and discuss feelings. But everybody's an expert on the movie they just saw.
Right.
And so we can ask, and we don't care if they want to rip on it. I want them, Acts 17:11, Christian, search the scriptures, see if these things are so. So our opening question is often, what'd you find most helpful, challenging, or disagreed with in the message? It's like, do that in your small group. You're going to do it anyway. We might as well have it in a controlled environment.
Yeah.
Was there anything you'd never heard before? And we tell it, it's okay if they don't get any further. But then we do go into parallel passages and stuff like that. But we find it's just youth ministry 101. You would teach things and have people talk about how it applies.
Yeah,
and
perfect.
so North Coast is a youth group for adults.
That's good. All right. Next question.
Any other? Nothing? All right, Stan.
Thank you, Larry. Sticky Church, phenomenal. It's been over a decade now.
That, by the way, if you're interested in the small groups, that's what Sticky Church is.
Yes.
It's closing the back door by relationships, because most people in churches don't need more information, they need more relationships. People don't want a friendly church, they want friends. And most of our churches are designed to create friendliness, not designed to create real life-on-life friends.
Wow. So over a decade now, and you mentioned time shifting over this last decade since Sticky Church. So those things you just shared haven't changed. If you had one more chapter in that book, is there something based on the last decade that you would change about that or add?
That's good.
I probably do two things. In the addendum, I would do something I say but people don't catch, and that is that at any given time, only about 80% of our groups are sermon-based. We're like an In-N-Out burger restaurant. You guys ever heard of those?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, very few things on the menu. We do them well. A lot of churches are like Jack in the Box, funny commercials, big menu, no line. We like to do it differently. But what actually happens is if you come and say, can we do something else, as long as it's not end-time speculation or politics disguised as theology, we'll let you do that for a quarter. And so we would say, hey, Brian, yeah, your group can do that. Just come back next time. Because when you have a tight fist, everybody squirms out of it. When you have an open fist, so I would make that clear, because so many people rigidly won't allow anything else to be done. And I go, it's not about our watering schedule. I'm just sharing one that works. There's other good ones. So that'd probably be the biggest thing. And I'd probably emphasize even stronger that people don't want a friendly church, they want friends. I mean, that is the theme of the book, but I'm amazed how many read it and just go to the recipe and don't. See, what happens is, again, fish and water thing, there's a missing piece in our modern day church that the New Testament and most of the world has always had. And that is you couldn't hide. Because it was a non-mobile culture. Tiny little towns, meeting in house churches. So if I'm yelling at my wife, you all know I'm yelling at my wife. But right now you have a church plant, and for 3 years it's been 60 people, and you meet 4 times a week. You think you're close. I go, you're still hiding. Because you're getting in a car and driving to the meeting. Very few of us live with very many people we can't hide from. And that's why, so I would probably add a stronger realization of I'm trying to create a dynamic that wasn't unique to the New Testament church. It was unique to the New Testament culture and most of culture throughout history, changed by mobility. Mobility gives us the ability to live with an image that no other culture ever had. I'm trying to get rid of that. That's why content's not that important to us. I just want a place where you can't hide.
That's good. Right here.
So if you can speak to Larry during those dark ages, those 3 years, what would you say to him in a conversation? And then also the Larry that is now in front of us, what is God telling you now? Like, where do you feel that you're at? What are you learning now?
Sure. Back then I'd say, you idiot. Because all the things I was telling you, I started third base in life. I don't have a father wound. My dad's 92 years old. You'd think he's 78. And mom, they're healthy, still have gleam in their eye when they're around each other. I just so lucky starting that way. So I didn't really have a lot to prove or whatever, but somehow I still had that professional thing to prove. So I would say that. I think the biggest thing God's teaching me right now is, if any of you who know me or read my stuff, Barnabas has always been my hero. I've been about empowering, but I'm in a zone where I'm really getting to do this. for 37 years. We've had a partnership model, not a sole proprietor. We even had for a few years co-pastor. 2 years ago, I became number 2, not number 1, etched on the wall. Chris Brown, some of you have heard, is our other teacher pastor, best narrative communicator in the country. But now he's the lead pastor, and I'm 1B. And it's not a transition because I'm not like going somewhere. It was just, you can't have somebody wait forever to have their name first if they're really a gifted leader. And if you're really going to be like Barnabas, do that. Well, that's very easy to preach on. It's a little harder to do. So the thing that God is teaching me right now is just the constant that most of the things we get upset about are based on power, prestige, or preference, none of which have Bible verses.
That's good.
Brian, I think we have time for one more.
Before we do that, I would love to hear what you guys do as far as, like, the question was reading and feeding, not just like biblically, but in your life. What, favorite authors, books, etc., or?
Well, Larry Osborne's my favorite. No, I'm just kidding. No, I appreciate your
Limited
books.
little world.
Yeah, I am somebody who likes, I like to change things up. I change the way that I read Scripture. I change the way that I pray. I mean, you heard me talk before about Amy and I have been prayer walking for 3 years around the building. We've got a dog with a lot of energy. But next year I may go back to journaling. I like to journal. But there's certain authors that just connect with my spirit more so than others. For whatever reason, I've always loved Tony Evans' books. They just connect with me. We're doing a lot of stuff here in our church right now on racial reconciliation and diversity and things like that. And this area is changing quickly. When we moved here back in '97, I think it was less than 8% minorities, and now it's almost 30%. And I've told our church over and over and over again, God didn't call us to reach people that look like us. He called us to reach the neighborhood. And when you reach the neighborhood, that means you're going to be reaching people who look different than you, vote different than you, think different than you, and the whole thing. So actually, recently, I've just been reading a lot of books, to be honest with you, that are helping me to understand the neighbors better. Cool. And they have stretched me in ways that I never thought I would be stretched before. So that's the journey that I'm on right now.
This is a unique season for me. I am actually in school in the process of working on a master's degree, and so I read anything Dallas Theological Seminary tells me to read.
That's good, yeah.
And that's legit. Like, that's about all I have time to read. But like Larry, I do read a lot of news. I'm a guy who never listens to the radio in my truck. I'm always podcasting something, listening to a lot of different guys. But you asked a question about fiction. So my wife got me into this a couple of years ago, and I did it mainly because I was having trouble sleeping. And I read a book that you gave me, Sleep Smarter, and one of the things he talked about was read at night, turn all screens off an hour before you go to bed, and read something at night that doesn't make you think about work, that doesn't make your brain have to fire, rapidly, strongly. And so I've started reading all these crime novels and thriller novels, and it's weird. Like, my wife, she made fun of me when I first got started, because it was a bunch of girly stuff. But it has helped me sleep, and I've enjoyed it more than I realized that I would. So cool. I recommend it.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, so 2 questions. What was the one book that you said was a bad book? And then...
One book that what?
They want to avoid the bad book. They want to know which book it is.
Yeah, you said you've had 10 books out there and one bad one. And then where did the Sticky Church Conference go? There was a couple years ago I was looking for it, and I know that it used to be a thing. Now it looks like all the energy is being put towards sticky teams. So, that's something that I would be super interested in, but it's been a few years. So just kind of wondering where that went.
Well, we have a North Coast training network. In fact, later on they'll put up on the screen. Any of you want to stay connected with us, you can text a thing to it. But what we've decided, and it'll be no surprise, my sense of the body of Christ, at North Coast we've decided, why don't we do what we do exceptionally well rather than what everybody else does, and we can't do as well. And so we have an annual Sticky Teams conference that's not about the book Sticky Teams, but it's designed to bring teams. If somebody comes alone, it costs you more money than if you bring staff. And then it usually has just some angle it takes, like finishing well, or it might be evangelism, it might be whatever. It just has a different theme every time. It's designed for teams to come and discuss. But all the other stuff, we decided we would have a greater impact if we did workshops for teams that came and vested into a couple of days. So we do workshops on that, not conferences on it. Because what you mean to say, what you say, and what people hear are three different things. So today I'm honored to do this. I don't do a ton, I have a certain amount of time I'm on the road speaking like this, because I feel like in many ways what it does is it whets an appetite, but people walk out saying, I said things I did not say, left and right. You've all had that experience, right? Yeah. Any preachers, people come up and say, I love it when you say, and you go, and I not only didn't say that, I don't believe it.
right.
Like, come on.
They heard.
So anyway, we've gone to workshops that we do, and we found, like at one point we had a 100% success rate. I haven't measured it since, but for about 12 years with teams that came out to learn how to do it, because then we could say, oh yeah, your situation is unique, and how about tweaking it this way or doing it that? So
that's good. All right, right
That's
before
good.
James and I talk about engaged churches, I want to ask you to do something for me, if you would. Okay.
Maybe.
So I mentioned earlier when I was introducing Larry before the morning started that he helped me through a season of transition, through a season of change. And I'd never really had met you before, but we sat down at lunch, and I was telling you about I was going to have to let go of a staff member who had founded the church with me. And I knew it was going to be painful, or I was trying to figure that out, actually. And as I look at this crowd, I know most of the folks in here have planted their church, and they're going through seasons of changes. And what you shared with me was the analogy of the golfer, the basketball team, the football team, and could you just share that with just a moment? I think it's powerful.
It came, I went down to the beach with a journal and just said, Lord, help me. I need a word picture to understand what's going on, because it was a coup attempt. And those of you who are successor pastors will never have a coup attempt, because you're not one of us, you don't understand us, that's not the way we do it, that's the pushback. But if you're the founder, builder of a church, as you grow and need to change, the pushback will be your changing. Now, what's happened is your values haven't changed, but your methods are changing, okay, based on the same values in a different situation. So I foolishly, like most people, kept saying, I'm not changing, because I'm not changing my values. I should have said, yes, I'm changing my methods because my values haven't changed. Well, when that happens, it's usually somewhere 2,500, 3,000, almost 80% of the time. So you're not stuck. It might not happen, but it's the Miriam and Aaron situation. Going, Moses, who do you think you are? And they were right. You have no success without me. You can't even talk without me. We read the Bible as if Moses spoke, but from the beginning, every time it's saying he spoke, it's really Aaron speaking for him. And so you get somebody in your church that says, well, you're the front person, but I'm only here because if I leave, you fall apart. Okay, and you get this kind of wonky, weird relationship going on where they're here for you. And like Marion and Aaron, they go, who do you think you are? And Marion actually rightly goes, I'm a prophetess too. She was. But God also said, what's that white stuff on you? Called leprosy. And so that's a common thing. And I'd gone through that. A best friend I'd started the church with around 2000. Up to 2000, his advice was wonderful. At 2000, his advice always would keep us at 2000. And I just knew it was wrong. And I started going to other people for advice. He felt I'm not getting advice. I'm becoming arrogant because I'm not getting advice from him. And of course, foolishly, I'm telling him I'm not. You can see the thing. It takes two to have a bad dance. It's not all his fault. So what happened, I sat on the beach and I said, Lord, is what's happening, because sin words are being thrown around left and right. Larry, you're not teachable anymore. You're arrogant, all that. No, you're not flexible. You're just trying to hold on to the past, this stuff. And the Lord gave me this picture that since then gets used in business circles. I'm amazed. But it has to do with the group dynamics as your church grows. When you're a church planter, you're like on a track team. Any of you ever run track or been part of track, right? You practice with others, but it's your game. All you care about is what's called your PR, your personal record. Did you improve? And you're like a decathlete. You're doing everything, but it's PR, not where you fit nationally, etc. Then, we don't like that. As soon as we can, we get to the most fun stage. I call it golfing buddies. Any of you ever golf? What's the most important hole? The 19th hole, right? After you've played 18, it's highly relational. You're chatting, you're talking. You got 4 or 5 people. You know everything about everybody. When you play golf, you see everybody shoot or take their shot. A good golfer and a bad golfer can be together if the bad guy doesn't spend too much time chasing balls in the weeds. It's okay. It's highly relational. It's a blast. That's the ministry team of 4 or 5. Then you get larger, you're more like 12 or 13. And it's like a basketball team. Any of you played basketball? That was a game I played. Basketball is a highly relational game as well. You go to the game in one big van. There's a lot of trash talk. But there's one big shift. Suddenly there are roles. When you're playing golf, bad and good can play together. When you're on a basketball team, everybody has a role. There's only 1 or 2 that ought to shoot when the quarter's about to end. And if it's not you, you won't be out there next time. There's somebody that you're supposed to provide energy coming off the bench. There's 3 guys that are practice fodder. When we're up by 30 with 30 seconds left, you get to get in the game. And everybody knows their role, right? But it's highly relational. Everybody knows everything still at basketball level. I'm not very tall for basketball. I was a point guard. But I could play center. I could play every position. And there was never a new play that was brought in that somebody, the worst guy and the best guy, all knew the new zone trap we're putting in or whatever. Everybody knew everything. Then you move relationally, as you get bigger, to more like a football team. And a football team is so big, you go to the game in 2 buses. And practice would go till 1 a.m. if the special teams, offense, and defense all had to know every play. So when a new blitz package is put in by the defense, offenses said, oh, how did that happen? And I didn't know. They understand that's part of being a football team. Just get the ball back so I can get on the field. But if somebody's thinking basketball, they're all upset. Be they a deacon, an elder, a staff member, they're all upset they weren't involved in the decision because they're still thinking basketball. So a lot of conflict in churches when it comes to power, prestige, and preference is centered around people thinking they're playing the wrong game. So what happened for me is I was playing football, and there's like high school football is different than college, than pro. And so I think we're playing football, but this guy thought we could play golf forever. His value was golfing relationships. And so as our relationships began to shift, everybody needed to get their own circle around them rather than us being one big happy family, which would limit our growth. He really struggled with that. So is that what you're looking for?
That's what I was looking for. Thank you for that.
If you have board members or staff members who are playing a different game than you're playing, you're going to have a problem. Because if you're playing football, it's okay to tackle. It's not okay if you're playing basketball, right? And you get problems.
That's good. Thank you, Larry. Let's thank Larry Osborne for investing us into today. All right. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you so much.
Decir, eso significa honrar. Que usted dice, Señor, yo te voy a honrar con esto, porque tú, yo estoy seguro, me vas a bendecir todo el año. Necesitamos no solamente practicar, sino obedecer el principio de las primicias si queremos ver, como Ana María y Juan Camilo, que su vida financiera incremente, que su vida financiera sea, hermano, realmente lleguen tantas bendiciones que uno dice, Señor, me quedo aterrado de tantas cosas hermosas que me están pasando en mis finanzas cuando te creo a ti. Aprender a darle a Dios primicias de todo, hermano, es el secreto para que el poder de la primicia se vea en nuestras vidas. Cuando usted reciba una bendición, algo nuevo que usted reciba, el año nuevo que usted reciba, de primicias, y usted verá los resultados. Cuando usted recibe un nuevo trabajo, proponga en su corazón, Señor, voy a dar una primicia por este nuevo trabajo, porque tú has sido fiel. Cuando a usted le dan algún regalo especial, algo nuevo, un proyecto de trabajo, algo especial, voy a sacar esta primicia para Dios. Y usted va a ver como el pueblo de Israel, como hermano, las bendiciones de Dios llegan sobre su vida. Si usted recibe un nuevo bebé, un nuevo hijo, ¿sabe qué? Yo voy a dar una primicia por este nuevo hijo que Dios me ha dado. Donde sea que usted reciba nuevas bendiciones, nuevos recursos, aprenda a honrar a Dios con una ofrenda de primicias, porque las ofrendas de primicias son como decirle, Señor, gracias, porque yo sé que esto es solamente, la primicia es solamente el principio de algo mejor que va a venir sobre mi vida. Pero se requiere fe para creerle a Dios su promesa. Si usted quiere buscar versículos, hay muchos en la Biblia, pero no se trata de buscar cuántos versículos me dicen esto, sino se trata de decir, ¿cuál de todos esos yo voy a obedecer? Voy a obedecer la palabra de Dios tal como está escrito. Cuando nosotros, hermanos, damos primicia a Dios, es como una thank you card. Es como una tarjetita de agradecimiento que usted dice, Dios, quiero agradecerte porque sé que tú has sido tan bueno y todas las bendiciones que yo recibo son de parte tuya. Yo le decía a Julián que he visto cómo Dios le ha bendecido y que he visto en todos mis años de vida aquí en Estados Unidos que a veces hay personas, hermano, que les ha tocado más duro que a Julián por mucho tiempo. En cambio, Julián ha sido bendecido por Dios. Y él decía esta mañana en la clase, es por Dios, pastor. Es por la gracia de Dios, es por la misericordia de Dios. Si nosotros aprendemos a ser agradecidos y a reconocer que Dios es el que nos bendice, que todo mi futuro, mi presente y que toda mi vida está en las manos de Dios. Cuando yo pienso a decirle, Señor, gracias. Nosotros a veces no hemos estado acostumbrados, hermano, como ciertas culturas. Yo he tenido la oportunidad de convivir con diferentes culturas y me impresiona una vez un vecino se le dañó su carro frente a mi casa y yo le ayudé a empujar. Oiga, qué carro tan pesado, un carro de 1965, viejito, pero era feliz con su classic car. Y yo le ayudé a empujarlo y bueno, es impresionante que esta persona, yo pensé que se había olvidado, como al día siguiente o a los 2 días, vino, nos golpeó la casa y nos trajo un regalito con una tarjeta que decía, gracias. Hermano, el poder del agradecimiento es grandioso. Dios quiere que aprendamos a ser agradecidos en todo y por todo. Y cuando damos gracias a Dios, el resultado son bendición. Las primicias honran a Dios. Cuando nosotros leemos en el libro de Nehemías, que Nehemías honró a Dios, restableció las primicias que se habían olvidado por el pueblo, porque el pueblo había sido llevado cautivo a Israel, a Babilonia, y ya no estaba practicando este principio de las primicias. Entonces Nehemías, que es el restaurador de muros y restaurador del pueblo y restaurador hasta de la palabra, también fue el restaurador de las primicias en el pueblo de Israel. Y cuando uno lee la vida de Nehemías, Nehemías le dice al pueblo que cada año traigan a la casa de Jehová las primicias de su tierra y las primicias de todo árbol que dé fruto. Nehemías 10:35. Lo más interesante es que Nehemías, que restableció, que restituyó las primicias en el pueblo, empezó a decirle al pueblo, oiga, aquí hay algo especial cuando ustedes obedecen la palabra, porque ustedes van a ser recordados por Dios. Y Nehemías, en el texto original, cuando usa la palabra acuérdate de mí, después de decir voy a dar mis primicias, por eso Dios, acuérdate de mí. Esa palabra acuérdate de las primicias, o acuérdate de lo que yo doy como primicias, es como si Dios pusiera una marca. El mismo texto, leyéndolo desde el original, dice, acuérdate, o dice, márcame Dios ahora por dar mis primicias. Recuérdame Dios ahora. Favoréceme Dios ahora. Increméntame Dios ahora que doy mis primicias. Nehemías 13:31 dice, también organicé la ofrenda de la leña en las fechas establecidas y la entrega de las primicias. Y luego el texto dice, acuérdate de mí, mi Dios, y favoréceme. Es como si dijera, Dios, aquí están mis primicias, ahora márcame Dios para una bendición. Márcame Dios y favoréceme para un incremento de mi vida y de mi hogar. La bendición, hermano, de creerle a Dios, las promesas de Dios, cuando obedecemos su palabra, es algo que practicó Nehemías y que practicaron los sacerdotes. En el libro de Ezequiel, por ejemplo, la Biblia habla de que así mi bendición reposará sobre los hogares de ustedes, dice Dios. Ezequiel capítulo 44. Las primicias es decirle a Dios, Señor, te traigo mis primicias con fe. Por eso ahora aquí estoy, para que durante todo este año yo sea una persona marcada por Dios para bendición. Por eso no se extrañe que usted empiece a ver que en su trabajo lo escogen a usted antes que a otras personas. Me gustó el testimonio de Julián esta mañana. Decía, pastor, yo soy de los nuevos y yo fui por allá a la oficina principal, y en lugar de darle reconocimiento a los gringos y a las personas que llevan muchos años, me dieron reconocimiento a mí, me dieron una placa a mí. ¿Sabe por qué? Porque Dios se encarga de marcar a aquellos que Él quiere favorecer, a aquellos que Él quiere incrementar, a aquellos que Él quiere bendecir. Usted recibió una tarjeta y usted dice, pastor, ¿y qué quiere hacer con la tarjeta? Bueno, esa tarjeta es una tarjeta que dice gracias. Yo quiero que usted en estos momentos ore y que usted tome esa tarjeta y que usted le diga, Señor, pon en mi mente cuáles son las primicias que tú quieres que yo dé este 2020. Y póngale su nombre o sus iniciales, y póngale lo que usted, el Espíritu Santo hoy, le dice, yo quiero que hagas esto porque yo quiero traer bendición sobre tu vida, sobre tu familia, sobre tu hogar. Y hágalo con fe. Yo lo voy a hacer, mi esposa lo va a hacer, y nosotros lo hemos practicado, hermano. Y me da gusto ver que Ana María es un testimonio para muchos de cómo con fe ha decidido, Señor, yo quiero hacerlo personalmente. Si cada uno de ustedes tiene su trabajo, hágalo de manera independiente. Tal vez su esposo no cree, o tal vez su esposo no quiere obedecer. Déjelo allá con Dios. Pero usted, preocúpese de decir, Señor, yo quiero obedecer esta palabra que tú me das, y quiero dar, Señor, una primicia para ti, para tu reino, que la voy a traer durante el mes de enero, Señor. Pero desde ahora usted dígale, Señor, aquí yo voy a poner, Señor, lo que tu Espíritu Santo me dirige. Y vamos a orar y vamos a adorar a Dios y a decirle, Espíritu Santo, yo sé que tú quieres traer incremento, bendición, abundancia, crecimiento, progreso, Señor, en mi vida financiera. Pero ayúdame a creer en ti, porque hay poder en dar las primicias. Padre, en el nombre de Cristo, Espíritu Santo, yo no sé cuánto tú quieres, Señor. Yo no sé si pueda tener la fe que otros tienen, Señor. Pero te pido que tú me dirijas, Señor. Que desafíes mi fe y que yo pueda decir, Señor, voy a hacerlo porque sé que Dios es el que no solamente me va a dar primicias para darle a Él, sino que toda mi cosecha restante va a ser santificada por mi Dios Todopoderoso. Dé su ofrenda de primicias con fe, y usted verá que en este año 2020 va a ser el año del incremento. Yo lo creo, yo estoy más que convencido. El ver personas que han practicado y han obedecido, y ver cómo Dios los incrementa, yo sé que Dios lo va a hacer con usted. Si usted le cree, si usted dice, Señor, yo quiero hacerlo con fe, ayúdame, ayúdame. Padre, en el nombre de Jesucristo, pido que desates ahora, Señor, una fuerte unción sobre tus hijos. Señor, así como lo hiciste con tu hija, hazlo con tu hijo. Así como lo hiciste con esa familia, hazlo con estas otras familias. Señor, glorifícate, honra a los que te honran. Señor, desata bendiciones, incrementos espirituales, incrementos en la vida familiar, incremento en la paz, en la salud, incremento, Señor, de promociones y de cosas mejores para tus hijos, porque creemos y obedecemos tu palabra. Señor, es la obediencia a tu palabra lo que va a generar un incremento sobrenatural en esta iglesia, en el nombre de Cristo. Señor, te doy gracias. por esas almas nuevas, porque son primicias de un incremento sobrenatural que vendrá sobre la iglesia, Señor. Yo lo creo, Señor. Yo lo creo, Señor. Mi fe está puesta en ti, que nunca falla, Señor. Señor, tú le mostraste a una persona que estas paredes van a ser tumbadas. Señor, y ese local ya lo están desocupando, no sé por qué, pero yo creo que algo grande tú vas a hacer en este lugar. Yo lo creo, Señor. Yo creo, Señor, que producto de esa fe de esta iglesia, en esas primicias, algo sobrenatural y grande sucederá, Señor, en estas familias, en esta iglesia, en el nombre de Cristo Jesús. Y capachúale que batuashtere capashtere. Y ashtra cababash. Muestra el Espíritu Santo y guía a tus hijos en el nombre